Before we start this evening, if anybody wishes to testify on any of the items on the agenda, we ask that you complete one of the blue cards in the back of the room and turn it into the planning commission planning manager or someone over there prior to the start of the meeting if you know you're going to testify this evening. Thank you. Yes, it does, including the applicant. It's the only way I can get a chance to mispronounce everybody's name this evening. I try my best, but it's hard. So prior to the meeting, we were handed several exhibits, and two of the exhibits are missing page 2 of the document. So before we can start the meeting, we're going to have staff is making copies for us and extra copies for someone for the table out there. So it'll probably be a couple more minutes before we get that complete packet for us to review. I just wanted to might as well. Nobody else is following. Yeah, I'm kind of worried if I have to change it. I think I just have to see the place. Yeah, that's what my thing is. I'll get some chicken, I'll get beans. Driving everyone out. Chicken's a nice for a little bit. You won't have time for a while. think so. All right, I believe we're ready. We're going to call to order the City of Sherwood Planning Commission meeting for May 14th, 2019. Roll call. Here.
Commissioner Holmes?
Here.
Commissioner Guy?
Here.
Commissioner Cottle?
Here.
Commissioner McCollum?
Here.
Commissioner Brown?
Here.
Thank you. We have on the consent agenda this evening the May 9th Planning Commission work session minutes, the May 23rd Planning Commission, and the May 23rd Planning Commission work session. Oh, it is April, sorry. We just went into the future. You're right. It's only May right now. So we have April 9th and 23rd work session minutes and April 23rd Planning Commission meeting minutes.
I move we adopt the consent agenda.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we adopt the consent agenda. Any discussion?
I have just Scrivener errors to give, but otherwise
And,
nothing else.
all right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Council liaison announcements?
Not here, so.
Not here, so we're moving quickly on to staff announcements.
Great. I have two staff announcements this evening. So on May 1st, our citizens, oh, thank you. So on May 1st, our Citizens Advisory Committee and our Technical Advisory Committee for our comprehensive plan met. They went over the scope of the project. They went over our economic development policies that we're working on in this first, our first block theme is our thriving and diversifying economy. We are continuing to work on public engagement activities for this block theme. We were at the Chamber of Commerce this morning, and then this upcoming Thursday morning, we'll be at Main Streets. And then we'll be doing some stakeholder interviews with some companies here in town. And then we'll be working on another public engagement activity for the community to engage in our policies for economic development. That'll be later in June or July.
I understand there was an announcement made that the website is,
Yes, so the website is up and running.
so yeah, run with that one.
Sherwood2040.org. Everyone can go to that website, find updated information about the comprehensive plan process, and we'll have surveys up on that website regularly to get input. Yeah. And then our next Planning Commission meeting, or work session actually, will be scheduled for the 28th of this month, and we're just going to do a wrap up of our fence.
Will that be,
Oh, good, the fence ordinance again.
Yes.
all right, is that going to be at 7 or 6:30?
6:30, preferably.
Sorry, get it on my calendar, you won't get me, so. All right, community comments. Community comments are limited to those items not already on the agenda. And you would still fill out a blue card, and I'm waiting for staff to review the blue sheets. If anybody wants to speak on an item not already on the agenda, you can come up and fill out the blue card afterwards. All right, no one is racing to the dais for community comments. And now we're going to move to old business. And, oh. What? Well, we can revert back to council announcements as we have not started this other one. Do you have any quick announcements, Councilor Scott?
Thanks for putting me on the spot.
Yeah, no problem whatsoever.
Budget committee's underway. So we had our first budget committee meeting last Thursday. The first of 3 planned. So the next one will be this Thursday. It's right here in the community room. 6 p.m. And then probably following up the following Thursday will be the last of the budget committee meeting, and then it'll go to council for final approval. So that's kind of the big news. We had the first reading right away. Thank you. Yeah, we had the first reading of a updated right-of-way code ordinance at our last meeting, and second reading should be at our next council meeting next Tuesday, right here, 7 p.m. And then there is if you haven't seen the big sign on Sherwood Boulevard and Pine, there is an RFP process going on right now to request proposals for development of that property. And so that's owned by the Urban Renewal Agency. So the Urban Renewal Board will be evaluating those proposals, and hopefully we'll see some good submissions come in. I think that's all I got for tonight.
All right, thank you very much for that very impromptu on-the-spot update. Budget Committee, very important, so that's nice that you were able to present that. So, back to old business. Now, we have a public hearing that was continued, and because we have a lot of new faces in the room, I'm going to read the public hearing script. It is 4 pages, but I'm going to do my best to consolidate those items that are duplicated. So the Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on PA 1901 and PUD 1901. The purpose of this hearing is to provide the public with an opportunity to testify and provide information to the Planning Commission concerning PA 1901, PUD 1901 Wildlife Crossing. The Commission will conduct tonight's hearing in the following order. Staff will present the staff report, followed by questions, if any, by the Planning Commission. We'll then open the hearing for public testimony, and each person's time will be limited as follows. The applicant will have 30 minutes split between presentation and rebuttal. Persons in favor of the application will have 4 minutes each. Persons opposed to the application will have 4 minutes each, and the rebuttal from the applicant is the remainder of their 30 minutes. We will then close the public hearing, and no other comments will be heard from the public or the applicant. There'll be final comments by staff and questions of staff, if any, by the commission. Then discussion and deliberation by the commission. Continuance. A recommendation to City Council may be made at the close of this hearing, or the matter may be continued to a time and date certain. If the matter is continued to a date certain, this will be the only notice of that date you receive. If you wish to speak, please fill out one of the blue testimony forms and submit it to the recording secretary. The Planning Commission Chair will recognize people who wish to speak, and any questions should be addressed through the chair. When you come forward, please state your name and address for the record, as this hearing will be recorded, and make sure the green light is on and speak clearly into the microphone. And these are legislative and quasi-judicial mixed. On the legislative matters, the Planning Commission's role is to make a recommendation to the City Council for a final decision on the pending matter. And the PUD is also going to the city. We are making a recommendation to City Council. The City Council is the final authority. In reaching a decision on the application, the Commission must consider on quasi-judicial items whether the application meets relevant approval criteria in the land use regulation. Those criteria are identified in the staff report. There are 2 copies of the staff report available in the room this evening. Testimony and evidence must address these criteria or other criteria you believe to apply to the decision. Please note, failure to raise an issue with enough detail to enable the Commission, the applicant, and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issues precludes an appeal to the City Council or Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. Also, failure by the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues regarding proposed conditions of approval, again with enough detail to allow the Commission to respond to the issue, precludes an action for damages in circuit court. And I ask members of the Commission to disclose ex parte contacts, bias, or conflicts of interest as it relates to the quasi-judicial. The legislative matters do not have an ex parte contact limitation. Please indicate the nature and extent of the ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest, and indicate whether you intend to participate in or abstain from the hearing.
I ask staff if they've ever had this type of application before, and if they had, could they show us what the findings were to see if there's any history of what we've decided in regards to secondary use on a commercial piece of property, and I assume that you didn't have any. I haven't seen any.
So are you declaring that your question of staff was?
I don't know if it's legislative or a part of the PUD, but I thought I'd disclose it to everyone so they knew what I
So
meant.
regardless, questions of staff are not
Okay.
ex parte.
Well, just so you know what I asked staff about. They need to know where my thinking is, so.
And just so we have a complete record, there were some other ex parte contacts and site visits that were disclosed at the last hearing.
Right.
Do you want to reiterate those just so that everybody here has an opportunity to respond to the substance?
I went over to try to figure out where the bridge to nowhere was going through the blackberry patch. Other than that, and I know the clauses from being in Sherwood for a long time, and I know the property because I've lived here forever.
I believe you said you had a call from the mayor as well.
Yeah, I don't remember if that was part of the legislative part of the PUD part, so those are the two.
Okay. Do you recall the substance of that conversation?
No, not really. If it's on the record, if I said it last time, it's on the record.
Yeah. I believe what you said last time was that he had a question and you didn't know the answer because you hadn't yet reviewed your packet.
Oh, okay, so, okay. There you go.
All right.
Same with me. I had a conversation with the mayor, and it was regarding the legislative matter, and it's in the record from previously. And I was trying to remember the details, which I don't remember all the details, which means it's not influencing my ability to make a decision this evening. But it was along the lines of the legislative matter to get context to the council goals and objectives. And as it is legislative, it's important for us to be in compliance with the city goals, I would presume. So, does anybody else? And I've known the clauses for years, and Susan and I serve on the CAC committee currently, but we have not discussed this application during this process at all.
For disclosure, I had spoken with Chair Simpson primarily regarding process in this situation, and then also speaking with Councilor Scott, also kind of getting a gauge of where City Council might be on a matter such as this. So,
Anybody else have any ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest to disclose?
So just for clarity, so the purpose of the ex parte disclosure is to disclose the substance of that communication so that any parties here would have an opportunity to rebut or provide alternative positions on those. So to the extent that you recall and are able to, disclosing the substance of those communications is what's critical. So for example, your conversation with Councilor Scott.
it was primarily around how council has previously made clear that their desire for Sherwood would be to increase its commercial tax base, and kind of how that relates to this matter. So,
Thank you.
Does any member of the audience wish to challenge any planning commission member's ability to participate this evening?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Henry Rao. I'm an attorney for the Klauses. They've asked me to challenge your sitting for this hearing, Chair. They believe that you, based on your long history with the Klauses, some of the testimony that you provided, presented personal animus last week. Also, your call with the mayor. All these things challenge your ability to impartially hear and consider this application. So we'd like to hear more about that call with the mayor. I understand you have some limitations on memory, but also why your personal history does not necessitate your recusal in this matter.
Okay, so again, the conversation with the mayor was related to the intent of code change or zone change and the legislative part of that we're trying to understand the council's goals for a balanced tax base and how this application would either fall in line with the council goals or if we're going to be violating their goals and objectives. And we don't want to send to the council something that's going to be violating their goals and objectives, because that would then either have them not take our recommendation or have to take an action opposite of what our recommendation would be based on what their stated goals are to the community. That's, to the best of my knowledge, the recollection of what my intent for calling the mayor was.
And again, you've already touched on this, but just to clarify for the record, the ex parte contact rule does not apply to legislative actions of this body. So ex parte is only an issue as it relates to quasi-judicial decisions, and even then, the only obligation is to disclose the substance of that communication and provide other parties an opportunity to rebut that.
So I would ask our attorney, within this application, these are Planning Commission recommendations to the City Council, so they are legislative in nature. When it comes to the zone change and the text amendments.
The zone change and the text amendments are definitely legislative in nature, yes.
And the planned unit development is a recommendation to council. Is it considered? And the subdivision itself, I can't even imagine that I would have gotten into that detail at all. That would not have been part of our conversation. I don't recall talking anything that had to do with that.
In that case, there's no ex parte contact issue.
So disclosing the conversation was unnecessary, but in an abundance of caution, to be fair, I wanted to disclose that. I don't know what the inference is about my not being able to be impartial is referring to.
And so the only question there is whether you believe that you have a bias or a prejudgment that would prevent you from being able to review and make your recommendation in this matter based on the evidence and arguments that are presented in the hearing.
I believe that I can be unbiased in making a decision, in that I would apply my decision making to this application regardless of who was in front of me, whether it's the clauses or anybody else within the city of Sherwood. My goal and purpose for being on the Planning Commission is to do good for the community as a whole, and it's irregardless of whose the application is. I look at the matter solely on the merits of what the code is and what our comprehensive plan is set forth, and what I believe the community has said when we've gone through these comprehensive plan meetings and what's in front of me.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, last week you said, a couple weeks ago, you said the mayor contacted you. Tonight you said you contacted him. Which was it, or was it both?
I left him a message and he called me back.
I think that concludes this part of the hearing script. Unless anybody has anything else to add on the commission.
All right. All right, we are.
Good evening, Commissioners. This hearing was opened on April 23rd and was continued till this evening. The role of the Planning Commission this evening will be to make a recommendation or a series of recommendations to the Sherwood City Council to review and consider when the council makes the final decision on this application. So the proposal, the applicant is proposing a rezone of 2.66 acres of a 5.91 acre site from medium density residential high to general commercial. The applicant is also proposing 2 text amendments to the Sherwood Zoning and Community Development Code and a planned unit development subdivision comprised of 28 lots that will be developed in 2 phases. So several issues were raised at the last hearing on April 23rd. The planning staff was asked to revise the staff report to analyze the proposed zone amendment and 2 text amendments independently from the PUD request. The updated staff report reflects this request. The applicant has also provided an updated parking plan and an architectural pattern book for both the residential and commercial phases of the proposed PUD. The applicant has also provided additional information on the housing design elements that include front and rear elevations. And the neighborhood meeting notice and sign-in sheets are included in Exhibit M. And the staff report includes additional discussion on the PUD benefits and how staff interpreted the residential use as secondary in this proposed mixed-use development. So I'm going to go over each proposal individually. So Proposal 1, the general plan and zone map amendment. So the subject site is located southwest of Meineke Road, south of the Winham subdivision and north of Highway 99. The entire site is 5.91 acres in size, and the red area shown on this map is the area proposed to be rezoned to general commercial. So as you can see here, the site is split zoned. The subject site has an existing single-family residence and several outbuildings that have been used for a variety of businesses over the years. So the applicant received approval to rezone this 2.66 acres of the site to medium density residential high in 2016. Since that time, the site has remained undeveloped, and the applicant is now proposing to rezone this back to general commercial as they have done additional technical analysis of the placement of the future extension of Cedarbrook Way. So on the left-hand side, you can see what it is currently zoned. And on the right-hand map is the proposed text amendment or map amendment to have it zoned all commercial. So our required findings for the map amendment. The Zoning and Community Development Code outlines 5 required findings that must be made to amend the city's comprehensive plan and zoning map. There needs to be a demonstrated need for the general commercial zoning development. The proposed amendment is timely. Other zoned properties are available or unsuitable for immediate development, and the amendment does not significantly affect the functional classification of a local county or transportation facility. And finally, it must be consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and other state and regional standards. So I'm going to talk about need and timeliness. So the applicant rezoned the 2.66 acre site to medium density residential high in 2016, and since that time, the site has not developed. The most recent economic opportunities analysis that the city just recently updated but has not been adopted at this time states that there is a 57-acre deficit of land for commercial and retail uses. During the next 20 years, the city will need to either identify new opportunities to address the commercial and retail land deficit through policies that encourage infill or redevelopment, or redesignate land for commercial uses. The next finding states that other general commercial properties are unavailable or unsuitable for the development. So there is a demonstrated lack of commercially zoned land within the city to meet the projected needs within the next 20-year planning period. So other similarly zoned land does not appear to be available or on the market, or they have challenges related to services. So this map, it shows all the commercial land use districts within Sherwood, and where the stars are located, these are the sites that have currently vacant commercial land. So just southwest of the site, there is some vacant commercial land. And then up near the intersection of Highway 99 and Roy Rogers to the northeast, there are some vacant parcels of commercially zoned land. But these lands, have topography and access issues, and probably will be a challenge for redevelopment for commercial uses. So the proposal will not negatively impact any adjacent transportation facilities. The site was a zoned general commercial when the city's TSP was adopted in 2014, and as such, that general commercial use was analyzed and was found consistent with the city's TSP. So comprehensive plan policies. So we looked at residential land use policies, the economic development policies, and the commercial land use policies. And here are the residential land use policies. The policies 1, 2, 3, and 6 were the policies we used to analyze this application. So the zone change request would change the site from medium density residential high to general commercial. And multifamily housing is a permitted use in the general commercial zone. And the community would have the opportunity to provide comments on site development through the land use application process when new development is proposed on site to ensure sites are developed in a manner that is consistent with the development code and community needs. The proposed zone change would allow for multifamily housing for the high-density residential standards. The city's housing needs analysis, which has just been updated, but has not been officially adopted by City Council, discusses the need for additional housing styles and tenures to ensure the availability of housing to meet a growing demand for millennials and baby boomers that are seeking small single-family detached and attached housing, as well as multifamily housing, which includes townhomes, condominiums, and apartments. The high-density residential standards provide for higher density housing units at a minimum of 16.8 dwelling units per acre. The medium density residential high zone has a minimum of 5.5 units per acre. For the comprehensive plan policies, and these policies are found actually on page 34 of your packet. So the proposal does not reduce the amount of commercially viable land within the city. The site is conveniently located to serve customers, allowing commercial activities near residential developments. And the commercial uses proposed on site will be reviewed once again and evaluated through the site plan at the time of land use application submittal. So consistency with the TSP, the proposal, like I said just a couple minutes earlier, is consistent with the TSP. So we had to find consistency with the state land use goals and Metro's urban growth management functional plan. So we found that the zone change is not inconsistent with the applicable statewide land use goals, which is goal 1, 2, 9, 10, and 12. And the analysis is provided in your packet. And the city is already in compliance with Metro Title I housing capacity. And we will continue to be in compliance. So the H&A states that about 9% of Sherwood's residential development over 2000 to the 2014 period occurred actually within commercial zones. And so it is reasonable to assume that some residential development in commercial zones over the next 20 years will occur in these areas. So currently the Sherwood Zoning and Community Development Code allows for multifamily housing and commercial areas if they are located on the upper floors, in the rear of, or clearly secondary to commercial buildings. So that there is the opportunity for new residential housing units within Sherwood through this zone change. So proposal number 2. So this is the proposed text amendments, chapter 16.22, commercial land districts. So the applicant proposes to strike out multifamily and replace with residential in this section. So this would allow for all types of housing, single family detached and attached, 2-family duplexes, townhomes, and different multifamily in commercially zoned areas when located on the upper floors, in the rear of, or clearly secondary to the commercial buildings. So once again, our required findings for the comprehensive plan text amendments, there needs to be a need, and the text amendments have to be consistent with the adopted Sherwood comprehensive plan. And they also have to be consistent with the city's TSP and other state and regional regulations. I just said that. Oops, sorry. All right, so first let's talk about the identified need. So the applicant has identified a need for such amendments. The applicant states that the city has significant need for all residential housing types, but particularly smaller lots for single-family residential development. The applicant has indicated that smaller housing types in the metro area are gaining popularity and that detached single-family units on individual lots under 5,000 square feet are not permitted under any of the city's existing zones, as well as the current PUD standards. The applicant has also stated, the applicant has also stated in their narrative that allowing for smaller lots, the homes should also slightly be more affordable. So the text amendment would allow for residential types, all residential types within commercially zoned areas if the residential use is, again, located on the upper floors to the rear of or clearly secondary to the commercial use. The residential portion of a mixed-use development is considered secondary when traffic trips generated, dedicated parking spaces, signage, and road frontage are all exceeded by that of the commercial components. And the commercial portion of the site is located primarily on the ground floor. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in this presentation. The consistency with the comprehensive plan. So making this change to allow for all residential types per the high-density residential standards in the commercially zoned areas could provide for a range of all housing types. But however, the single-family detached minimum lot size is still 5,000 square feet per the HDR zone. So you would not see a lot of single-family housing with this zone change, just because they would need to meet the minimum density of 16.8 dwelling units. So if somebody came in with an application to develop a mixed-use PUD, they would have to meet that minimum density of the HDR zone, which is 16.8. So in order to achieve that density, there might have to be like a mixture of some single-family, but some multifamily to have that minimum density allowance. So this text amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan, but like I said, the minimum lot size for single-family detached housing of 5,000 square feet really limits the housing type within the commercially zoned areas because of the density requirements. Consistency with the transportation plan, once again, when a proposal comes in for site development, it will be reviewed against the city's TSP at that time. So this proposal is consistent with the TSP. This text amendment is also in compliance with Metro Title I housing. The amendment is not reducing the housing supply. The proposed amendment is also found to be in compliance with the applicable statewide planning goals as well. So the third proposal is some text amendments to Chapter 16.40, Planned Unit Developments. The applicant is proposing a text change to the Planned Unit Development Chapter. The proposed change to this section of the code would allow for no minimum lot size requirement in the high-density residential zone. And this would also include commercially zoned areas because commercially zoned areas use those standards within the HDR zone. So lot sizes for single-family detached dwellings then could be smaller than 5,000 square feet if this were approved using this PUD standard. The required findings, once again, there needs to be a need. It has to be consistent with the comp plan. It has to be consistent with the city's TSP and state and city statutes. Or regional statutes, sorry. So identified need. So the applicant has identified a need for the amendment. Currently, Sherwood zoning code does not allow for single-family detached homes on lots smaller than 5,000 square feet in any land use district. So the applicant has identified a need for smaller housing types within the community. The city's housing needs analysis also identifies the need for additional multifamily and smaller lot development within the community. The applicant has also stated in their narrative that allowing for smaller lots, the home should be slightly more affordable. There are new developments within the community that were approved with lots smaller than 5,000 square feet, and these include Arbor Terrace, Cedar Creek PUD, and Vintage Creek townhomes. So the text amendment is not inconsistent with any of the housing policies in the comprehensive plan. So it would provide for additional flexibility of smaller lot sizes within the HDR and commercially zoned areas when a site is developed through the PUD process. It is during the PUD process that the Planning Commission and the community have a chance to provide input that will ensure that the PUD is developed in a manner that is consistent with the comprehensive plan and benefits the Sherwood community. So the proposed amendment is not inconsistent with the city's TSP. The proposed development utilizes the proposed development on any site that utilizes the standard will be reviewed for transportation impacts when a land use application is submitted for development. And once again, the proposed amendment is not inconsistent with the applicable statewide land use planning goals 1, 2, 10, and 12 that were analyzed in your staff report. The proposal number 4, the Wildlife Crossing Planned Unit Development and Subdivision. So this slide just shows all the review criteria for this PUD subdivision application. And I know I talked about the preliminary plats at our last meeting, but I'm just going to do a very quick review here. So as you can see, this is a 28 lot subdivision. We have one lot that faces, let me see if I can get my pointer to work, actually, laser pointer. Oh, there it is. But will it move? That is the question. And it won't. Okay. So the lot that the laser pointer is actually on at the moment, that larger lot that fronts Highway 99, that lot is proposed for commercial uses. The back 27 lots are proposed for the single-family detached homes. Now, you can see that the extension of Cedar Brook Way bifurcates this parcel and kind of splits it into, as you can see. And then there would be an extension of Southwest Swanstrom Drive, and then a new local street, Southwest Najomi Drive, that would provide access to all the individual lots to be served from. Just a quick little overview about the open space. The applicant is proposing open space for this PUD in tract B and A. And then there are some regulated areas also within this planned unit development. There's a creek, there's like a little stream vegetative corridor that runs down the eastern boundary. The applicant is proposing some playground equipment in that tract B for the community as well. So at the April 23rd hearing, Planning Commission asked the applicant to bring additional information on parking impacts. And so the applicant has provided an additional parking plan. As you can see here, each driveway will be able to park 2 cars for a total of 54 spaces. And in addition, the plan shows another 32 on-street parking spaces. And plus there's an additional 3 spaces in tract B. So the total number of off-street parking spaces is 54, plus the on-street parking of 32 spaces, in addition to the 3 designated spaces in tract B, total 89 parking spaces. So this is an average of 3.2 spaces per unit. And the applicant has stated that this is over 200% more than what the municipal code requires. So at the last Planning Commission meeting on April 23rd, we did talk about how this application does meet the parking requirement because you only need 1 parking space per residential dwelling here in Sherwood. So the applicant has presented additional information and materials on the elevations of the housing types. The garage is set back. Materials include decorative stone, decorative gable vents, belly bands to break up massing, window trims, and different mid-level roof types. So the pattern book, the updated pattern book that you have received really describes these features for each of the dwellings and prescribes a list of features that the houses must meet, and they must meet 9 out of the 10 elements for design that are listed in the pattern book. So the applicant has also provided additional information on the commercial design standards. And there's a whole list in that pattern book of commercial design standards for Lot 28 to meet when it comes back to Planning Commission for its final site plan approval at some later date and time when they propose commercial development. Some of these standards include that building entrances have to be orientated with pedestrian access considered. There can't be any blank walls along public streets, and that commercial buildings are to provide for ground floor windows to allow for views into working areas, lobbies, and display windows. And like I said, there's additional information in the pattern book. I'm just not going to go through it all. There's quite a bit.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So our PUD benefits, as we discussed, it's in your packet. Actually, it's in your staff report. I just want to give you the page number here. So we have a discussion of that starting on page 37 and 38. So the PUD benefits of this PUD include open space, playground equipment. You have smaller lots to meet housing needs. You have the dedication of right-of-way for the extension of Cedarbrook Way. And then when we talk about residential as a secondary use, so staff has interpreted residential as secondary, as a secondary use in this PUD development. When the traffic trips generated, dedicated parking spaces, signage and road frontage of the residential use are exceeded by that of the commercial component. So in this application, the residential trips are low for the residential uses, and the commercial uses on lot 28 are expected to exceed that of the residential trip generation, and also parking spaces. But once again, when lot 28 comes back to Planning Commission, this will be reviewed again for consistency. So additional public comments that we have received since April 23rd. We received additional testimony from Celeste Anderson, which is Exhibit R, Nicole Brutowski, Exhibit S, Nathan Doyle, which is Exhibit T, and he actually asked me if I could read his testimony into the record this evening, and it's really short. So I'm just going to take a moment to do so. So this is from Nathan Doyle. At the last meeting, I shared my experience with the anticipated continuance of Cedarbrook Way and the clauses. I just want to clarify that the clauses suit was part of the Land Use Board of Appeals and not directed to me personally. Sincerely, Nathan Doyle. And we also received testimony from Kevin Fink, which is Exhibit U. And then we also received additional testimony from the applicant as well. So the recommendation, so staff recommends that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation of approval with conditions of the wildlife crossing application PA 1901 and PUD 1901 to City Council. And the applicant is here this evening as well.
Just 1 second. Okay, so do we have questions of the staff prior to calling for the applicant's testimony?
I just have one, and I want to give it so that everybody can hear it, so when they're testifying, they can address the issue. The code, the only issue I have is the code says that the residential property or development has to be clearly secondary to the buildings, to the commercial buildings. We have no commercial buildings before, so how, I know if it said clearly secondary to the zoning, I'd say, yeah, it's clearly secondary to the zoning, but without buildings in front of me, how do I know it's secondary to it?
Sorry, I'm just gonna grab my code book here really quick.
That's the question I asked him before, so hopefully they.
All right, so it says when located on the upper floors and the rear of are clearly secondary to
Or
the
otherwise
commercial.
clearly secondary.
So you have that bifurcation of Cedar Brook Way. You have the residential units to the
Right.
rear of, and then the commercial uses.
Rear of what?
I think that what we have interpreted it to mean,
Okay,
and
that's what I-
certainly the planning commission could have a different interpretation, and ultimately the council could as well, is that this is essentially a phased development project. The front portion is going to be phase 2, and it's going to be commercial, and so we have interpreted that it is ultimately clearly secondary to that commercial piece. But ultimately, the planning commission could not agree with staff's interpretation of that.
That's my only question I have.
Is it out of bounds to kind of get Josh's viewpoint of the terminology of the code as by definition of secondary?
I think asking your city attorney for legal interpretation or input is
That's why
totally
he's there,
appropriate at a public hearing.
So you're not going to be happy with my answer, though, which is that I think that the code could defensively be interpreted either way. So the question really is, the use has to be secondary, but can the commercial development, does the commercial development have to happen prior to or contemporaneously with the residential development, or could it happen subsequent to the residential development and still be the primary purpose, primary use? That code could really be interpreted either way. And there has not been, to my knowledge, and staff's knowledge, any prior interpretation of that section of the code.
So there's no precedent to.
No precedent. This planning commission has a case of first impression.
Fabulous.
So, like, there's three sections to that. Can you read all? Because they have to comply with all three of them. Trip permits, it seems reasonable to expect that a commercial development of 1
Yes, so it says the residential portion of a mixed-use development is considered secondary when traffic trips generated, dedicated parking spaces, signage, and the road frontage of the residential uses are all exceeded by that of the commercial components, and the commercial portion of the site is located primarily on the ground floor.
So, road frontages, how does that? They have road frontage. There's a road frontage on Highway 99 and a road frontage on Cedar Brook
Way
for the commercial. And then on the residential, they have the road frontage on Cedar Brook, Swanstrom, and
the new street.
The new street. So,
Southwest Najomi.
okay.
So I would defer that to the applicant.
Okay, so
for
that
the square footage.
the parking or trip permits. Trip seems that you certainly want your commercial to generate more than the trips that a residential is going to do. Okay, that was my question. And then, does anybody else have any questions of staff prior to calling the applicant up?
I would like to ask on page 20, on page 24, but where it also says page 7 of 101, under Section 4, map amendment required findings. Chapter 3, growth management. Second paragraph into staff analysis, livability and desired population densities are implemented through the existing zoning map designations and allowed land use for each zoning designation. Due to the subjective nature of livability and desired population densities, any proposed changes to the zoning categories are evaluated by the decision-making authority and founded on their understanding of the community's needs and desires. Can that be expanded upon further? Do you have any further explanation on that?
It means it's discretionary and subjective.
Okay.
I mean, that's,
Yeah.
And then I have one question on page 35. In the staff analysis, the applicant proposes a rezone 2.66 acres. And in the second paragraph, it says, as conditioned above, the 2.66 acre will not be developed with commercial uses, instead residential. And I don't see a spelled out condition. So, it adds to my confusion in the staff report where we're advocating that a change from residential to commercial is warranted because we need more commercial land, but we are doing it with the understanding that it is not going to be used for commercial, and so the arguments and the findings are conflicting with the nature of the application. And I'm seeing nods from other commissioners that we're not understanding how the findings of a commercial zone change are matching with what the applicant is. There, first off, is there a condition that is going to be on their deed that will not allow them to do anything other than residential on the back side, or are they?
So staff did not propose that condition, but that's something that.
Well, it's not, but it's listed
Right.
in here that it states that there's a condition of approval.
Right, and that should just be struck because we don't have that condition in the staff report, or in the list of conditions at the end of the staff report.
Okay. So it's not a condition.
It's not a condition.
So the wording on that'll have to be
Right,
okay.
unless you have a discussion and you want to make it a condition or a recommendation, to city council for that, but I'll leave that up to you. I do want to say, in regards to the commercial and the residential values components that we see with this application. So in the community right now, since we just updated our housing needs analysis and our economic opportunities analysis, there's a need for both. The economic opportunities analysis, indicates that we have a deficit for commercial land. In our housing needs analysis, it talks about that Sherwood has a need for, multifamily or smaller development lots for the community as we grow within the next 20 years.
But that's not part of the zone change. The zone change itself doesn't guarantee one or the other. It's 4 separate approvals. So the zone change itself, unless we condition it to be only prescribed,
Right.
which is outside of what the applicant is asking for. I'm just not wanting to rewrite their application for something that's not being, they're asking us to change it to commercial.
Right, and the commercial does allow the opportunity for residential development.
Correct.
Right, but your analysis is stating that it meets the need of more commercial land because
Well,
we have deficit, but clearly the applicant's not going to use it for commercial purposes. So
it meets the need for commercial, but could also meet the need for additional housing.
Yeah, the term
Okay.
commercial in the code actually means commercial and high-density residential used as a secondary purpose. So it's more than what you think of just commercial. It includes the high-density residential. I
Okay,
think.
so as long as we're not
Right.
putting a condition that's requiring them to do something, I'm okay to move forward with the applicants, or if there's any other questions of staff regarding any of the.
Erica, when you mentioned that while there may be a need for both from the perspective of both the economic opportunities analysis and the housing needs analysis, it's my understanding that a concern of city councils is the deficit that residential produces in terms of cost balanced tax base in terms of having a more balanced tax base. So has that been looked at from a financial standpoint in terms of the interpretation that we need more and all types of housing necessarily? Just seems to conflict with that.
We haven't.
So I feel like I think you need to ask questions of the applicant. It's really, it is discretionary. There are findings that can be made. I mean, we believe that you could make findings of approval for both. You could condition residential on that back. I mean, it's a complicated project because there are multiple pieces. And I mean, there isn't a perfect answer in any, like there's balance in all of the analysis, and that's why it's a discretionary legislative type of decision is, it is not a black and white thing. It's not you're 20 feet setback or you're not 20 feet setback. It's more complicated than that. And so I think, we can certainly provide more information, but I think part of it needs to go to the applicant as well.
Okay. All right. Any other questions of staff before we call the applicant up? All right. I have no blue cards to know who's testifying for the applicant.
So the ones that are binder clipped together are the applicants.
All right. Thank you. So, are you coming up together or each testifying separately? Because I have Henry Rao.
Well, I think part of what we need to know is, are you wanting to ask us questions right now?
No, we want to allow you an opportunity to testify, and then we can have questions.
How many other people are scheduled to testify? So if we're just trying to manage time.
I don't, and until we close the public hearing, we don't know how many people from the audience.
How many slips do you have? Is what I'm saying.
I have an additional 3 on top of yours, which begs the question on timing. Last meeting we went very late, and we have other applications after this one that we need to do due time, and I don't want to rush or make a bad decision. Is there an opportunity for us to toll the 120 days at this time so that at 11 o'clock tonight we don't have to ask for finding to try and extend this or continue it so that we don't run out of time?
Why don't we see so let me say this to you. Jim is almost deaf in one of his ears, and it's hard. We're trying to make accommodations, so it might take a little bit longer that way too. But why don't we see what the testimony is and see where we are after the testimony? What she's saying is we want to extend it out another 2 weeks.
Extend the 120-day deadline. So
And this is not an ADA compliant hearing. I can't hear what's going on. They're making no effort to accommodate that.
We just found out about it.
I don't understand. So what's the point? This is rude beyond words.
okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute recess to allow staff to.
Quiet now.
That they're going to find.
I cannot hear. I'm deaf out of one ear. I shouldn't be here, but I have to be here because you're putting the stress on me. So get it ADA compliant now.
We're taking a 5-minute recess to allow staff an opportunity.
I know.
Isn't it clearly secondary to existing commercial?
No,
buildings?
to
This
that
is
commercial.
To the commercial buildings, the planned commercial buildings.
I don't have any idea.
Right.
Is it gonna be a parking lot for a used car lot? I have no idea. That's my problem. That's my only problem, to be honest with you.
We don't have the details about it.
That's right, that's my only problem. Yeah, that's my only problem. Although I am gonna suggest we put a minimum lot size.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Ed, you want to come over too?
I can tell you the score.
All right. Are we all back?
So what you're going to do is ask questions, and then our 30 minutes begin, or you're going to ask questions and then have the people testify and then turn over the 30 minutes.
So the way the process works, and I think Josh had a comment also, but I'll.
I want to stop you right there. This is an advisory hearing. I cannot find in the Oregon statutes any reference to advisory or in your code or in anything else. This is not mediation. This is not arbitration. This is some kind of advisory hearing. You are not voting on this. You're not voting on it. You're giving advice. And so be very careful when you start saying you're going to do a kind of protocol, because this stuff comes out of the legislative guidebook that APA prepared that has been pretty thoroughly pounded by competent lawyers. It's a 14th Amendment violation, for heaven's sakes.
Well, based on my public hearing script, the applicant will have 30 minutes split between presentation and rebuttal. Persons in the favor of the application will have 4 minutes each. Persons opposed to the application will have 4 minutes each. And there'll be a rebuttal from the applicant with the remainder of the 30 minutes.
How long is the rebuttal?
The balance of the 30 minutes. It has to be split between presentation and rebuttal.
Including your rebuttal.
Correct. Presentation and rebuttal total be 30 minutes. After which, if the commission has questions, we can ask questions, but it doesn't count towards your 30-minute total for presentation and rebuttal. And we'll hold our questions until after you've done your presentation and rebuttal.
So did you want to ask questions now?
No, we're going to allow you to make your presentation, allow the public to testify, allow you to make your rebuttal, and then we'll have questions after you've completed your testimony.
And this would be the presentation in addition to what was done last time?
Right, you have 30 minutes for presentation and rebuttal combined.
All right. So when do you want to start?
And before we begin that, just what we wanted to note for the record and for the benefit of the public. In general, if you need some sort of an accommodation for a public hearing or public meeting, we always try to accommodate that. We do request that you provide us with notice of that in advance so that we can be prepared. But fortunately, in this case, we were able to locate and provide an assistive listening device. So hopefully that will be sufficient to you being able to participate in this hearing. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
And you have a total of 3 other?
I've received another blue card. So as people find that they want to make testimony, they're welcome to fill out blue cards and submit them at any time up until the time we close the public hearing.
Chair, I just want to make sure I understand this, is that we had a full hearing last time, and we had specific questions for them, and I think what they're asking is, we're really doing this to answer the questions we had last time, and then any additional questions. We don't need a representation of everything they did last time.
They don't.
Unless they want to do it that way.
Right.
No, but that's what I was trying to get at,
Okay.
because there's only 30 minutes.
Right, you don't need to represent everything, but you can use your 30 minutes in presentation or rebuttal, however you see as appropriate based on our continued hearing status.
Okay, so let me ask you this. The materials that we gave to the Planning Commission, were those responsive to the questions that you had? From you had a series of questions for us and things that you wanted us to do. We submitted materials, you guys have reviewed them. What we want to know is,
Do we have any
have more
questions on those?
questions on those, or you know,
Right.
where are we? Because nobody wants to plow over more ground.
Would it help would you like us to ask any questions we have, and then you can answer them using your 30 minutes? Is that how you want it? I mean, I don't want them just to stumble in the dark trying to answer questions that we don't have.
Mark, the problem is,
I would like to have the applicant provide their presentation, have the opportunity for the public to testify, and then there'll be an opportunity for you to provide rebuttal, and then we can ask questions that will not be part of your 30 minutes.
Provided we've not exceeded the 30 minutes, correct? Because if we've gone over the 30 minutes,
If your presentation takes 30 minutes, then that's your presentation, correct?
But just to
And
clarify
where
what you just stated, when the commission starts asking questions, the timer stops, and that does not count towards your 30 minutes. So you can make any presentation you want to make, then the commission will start asking questions. That part, the question and answer, does not count against your 30 minutes.
Okay, and so then you also made a statement that anybody in the audience at any time can come and testify. So you,
Until we close the public hearing,
okay,
correct?
but then we wouldn't have an opportunity for rebuttal if it was after our,
Yeah, you have to testify before your rebuttal.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I just, thank you
Yes.
for clarifying,
Well, you keep asking how many blue cards I have, but if during your presentation or someone else's testimony, other people choose to come up and put in a blue card before we complete that agenda item, I don't want to prevent the public from being able to testify during that part of the hearing.
but you're also aware that if we've exceeded the 30-minute, correcting material mistakes in your report, we'd have no due process to answer additional false statements. And there are a number of people that have been writing things in that are making false statements. They are not accurate. They're fact defamatory.
Okay.
Now, you're telling us we can't answer that if we exceed the 30 minutes. Now, that's the reason I think you should have recused yourself. That aside, you make the rules, you live with them.
All right. Are you ready to start the presentation? We'll have the 30 minutes.
do we want to do the presentation or wait till the other testimony?
Well, we'll go 15, 20 minutes and then cut it off so we retain 10.
Okay.
I can't think of any other way.
You can follow the clock up there to see when your 20 minutes are up, if you want to cut it off there, and then you reserve 10
It's the
minutes.
only way we have any chance. Okay, now,
All right, then if you begin with your name and address for the record, we'll start.
all right. Now, first of all, you have a report from you that is negligent misrepresentation at the best. This is the oldest general commercial piece on the highway. It has had businesses there, including the high school's book depository, for years. It was used by ODOT when Six Corners was built as a staging area. It's had multiple uses and multiple history. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When we bought the property, we hired an attorney, and in 1954, easements were put on that property that said, if a frontage road is built, and you want to hear this, Mark, because you're an attorney, you'll understand this. I doubt some of the commissioners will. You can take away those easements. The assumption was, at that point, Meineke was putting the intersection in our property. That has changed. They moved it down the road with $15 million of excess Oregon money. That's not in the report, and it's critical because it was removed off of the transportation plan. After it was moved off of the transportation plan, we went through a number of items because Julia likes connectivity. Those of us that work in real estate like site selection and development. What you want is a site you control access to a major highway, visibility to a major highway, and no one else can come in there. We then had fire access out the back. That cost us money. We had to pay for the road. There's a gentleman making statements he owns the road. We have a surveyor here. Be very careful when you make those statements because we've got it surveyed and we had it surveyed. That kept us marked so that if we went over 49 units, we could access out the back for fire, which the Tualatin Valley Fire Department wanted. Now, do you understand it was a unit development? We then paid additional money to have the 8-inch sewer line brought up to our property line. Now, why am I telling this? Access, sewer, water, and the proper zoning. It was ready to be developed. And until somebody came up with Cedar Brook Way, guess what? We could have developed it because all the county and everyone were letting us build buildings. Shortcoming in your report, you don't know about it. There was a time when the county controlled our buildings and we conformed with that. Now, 4 times we've had the police, Barry Elser and Hammond out there trying to put my wife in prison for violating the law, and 4 times they've left and said, gee, we're sorry we bothered you. We wanted to put you in jail, but we can't find you did anything illegal. None of that's mentioned. Now, what then happened is out of the blue, they decided they were going to put in Cedar Brook Way. You have it on your maps. Whoever thought of Cedar Brook Way needed a keeper. Because when you put Cedar Brook Way in, you had to cross Doyle and you had to cross a wetlands, and then you got to our property and then you had to move up. Well, there was a little problem with that. That meant you had committed a Dolan v. Tiger. It's an exaction. We didn't want it. We didn't need it. Now, let me repeat what I'm telling you again. We had access out the back. We had 2, not 1, 2 deeded easements to the highway, unlimited. Ron Krupp came out and tried to tell that to Ross Schultz. John McCulloch of the Justice Department tried to tell him. Don Jordan tried to tell him, and Barry Leslie tried to tell him. It's development ready. But they said, stop, stop, stop. These are the biggest donors in the history of Sherwood. Jim Rapp couldn't build Stell Olson Park Walkway. So he came down and said, oh, poor me. I need 4 acres and I don't have any money to get the federal grant. So we gave him the 4 acres. We started the refuge. Everything you see on Tongan was our donation. We're the ones that donated the parking lot downtown and the theater. You were there when they originally opened up the theater. I can go on and on and on. And Krupp said, what is wrong with you people? These are your best friends. They own all of the easements on their side of the highway. Marion Hostler, Elwert, and Syntex sold us a 3rd easement. So we had it all. Now, you know that because you've seen the paperwork. So now, Ron Krupp came in and said, Jim, we'd like to study and come up with a better solution. I said, when have we stopped better solutions, Ron? Well, he said, you never have. I said, when have we not given to the city? Our donations are in the tens of thousands of dollars. Did I make a mistake? You have to go to the Jewish idea of charity to say it wasn't a mistake. And since my mother was Jewish, I guess I didn't make a mistake. But I wouldn't do it again. So we put together a study group. Do you get this? And they went to Schultz, and he said no. Now we know all of this started when I reported that Home Depot, which was light industrial, had been bogey zoned for Home Depot. Jiminy Christmas, it went from $12.50 a foot to $15. I love Langer and Brennicky. I wish I could make money like that. But like I said, I read the Talmud too much and the Book of Mormon. You don't do that. So all of a sudden we started getting hammered every time we turned around. And then the big thing happened. Opus came there to build. They got told by Keith Bayes, you'll go on Langer's, you'll go no place, because they wanted to put it on urban renewal. And they turned around, and Walmart came there, and we were in negotiation, and Scott Franklin, you remember him, he was on the council, said, well, Jim, we got a real problem. It's Langer or no place. Whoa, restraints against alienation, I would call that. But of course, I always plan when I build a project that in the end, the sum is worth more than the parts. I don't get zoning change. By the way, we had to fire Boar Meadow for Home Depot because it turned out to be true. And that's why they put the $15 million into Meineke, was to buy us off from reporting they put a stoplight in the wrong place. Incidentally, the zoning across the street there is all non-conforming illegal. So we had the study group, and guess what? Cedarbrook Way does not cancel our easements. Now that's why we're here tonight. The ceiling should fall on you folks. And these people that have complaining about our zoning, it's been there 20 years, should back off, because that was general commercial and the staff told us change the zoning. They actually thought, and ODOT's investigating it now, somebody had said Cedarbrook Way was a frontage road and it canceled our easements. They came down and investigated it, and it doesn't. We had changed the zoning because we thought this staff had gone beyond Maria Danielson and Marty Ginvold. Ginvold's not with ODOT anymore. And they weren't. So what are we the victim of? We changed the zoning to accommodate the city because, call it negligent misrepresentation, lawyers like that word. Some of the politicians like the word lie, put whatever you want on it. We weren't told the truth. Were we stupid? Well, I'm sorry, she was getting over breast cancer. I just went through open heart surgery. I'd lost my hearing. I was having all kinds of troubles. So our consultants thought they could rely on it. So now we've used up 10 minutes, so what am I telling you? You're here for advice. If I were you, I'd have a very serious session. Doyle is a nice guy, and he really is. But I'm glad he works on teeth. God, if he was a lawyer, he would be sued for malpractice till he turned green. He gave a slope easement and a vegetative easement to Clean Water Services where Cedarbrook Way goes, so you can't put it in anymore until you get Clean Water Services to not protect a wetland. Good luck with that one. Let me tell you, when you meet Diana Taniguchi Dennis, don't mistake that lady for being soft. She protects wetlands. Now, you're saying to me, are you telling me Doyle doesn't know what he did? Yeah. He doesn't know that an easement given to somebody like Clean Water Services is giving away an interest in your property, for God's sakes. That's why he's not here tonight. Oh, that's what you were complaining about? Won't you put in my road? I won't put in road. I'm not going to tell you Clean Water Services. So, we called John Mackler. He runs this district. Julia could confirm that. And he went to the Justice Department. And they said, yes, you had negligent misrepresentation. Those easements are still good. If those easements had been good, we'd never asked for the zoning change. We thought we were being the good citizen. Were we the good citizen? No. We were damn much fools. We trusted you guys. That's a mistake. Now, Mackler said, look, stop, Jim, stop. You've got these easements, you've got 3 of them. Now, do you want to hurt Ken Shannon, the neighbor? Because now you won't understand some of this. He has a reservation of rights. He doesn't have an easement. It means his traffic can go on the highway. But it doesn't say where. The next piece is Joe Broadhurst. He sold the easement and the reservation of rights, and so did the Elks. So Mackler's a transportation guy. He said, would you work with us? I said, I don't know why anybody would work at the city of Sherwood. We gave away scab lands, beautiful sites, 40 acres of beautiful sites we created to create the refuge. We didn't have any trouble. I can go on and on. You have no idea. Another 9 acres recently. We're in a meeting and Damon Rush of Clean Water Services said, you know, we have to get something for you to mitigate. And all of a sudden he leaned back in his chair and said, oh my God, you just gave us 9 acres. I forget I said that. Now, I don't mind people running me down. That's fine. That's been from the time I was a little kid. But I don't like people not telling the truth. And here's the problem you have. We're going to have to fight over that zoning change. It's about $1 million. But that's not the interesting thing. Then we're going to go out on the highway and we're going to shut it down because there's a spacing requirement for easements. We don't want to do that to our neighbors. Now, I think some of you would. Jean's certainly done it. She's done it to us. Remember the time, Jane, we hired a lawyer, Eric Postma, of Bullock and Associates? Do you remember that? And do you remember how we got the largest shelter builder in Oregon? And $85,000 later, they had a code compliant application for the property we're living in. And then Pat Allen and Chris Green went after us after they'd recommended it. $85,000, and you were the swing vote. I think you'll vote the same way again. But be that as it may, what am I trying to tell you? You've got a series of problems. We would like to get Mackler, now here comes the big thing, and Joyce Soper's a good lawyer. And he'll tell you this for a fact. You can't study that if Joe Gall will not fill out the paperwork for ODOT. Did you hear what I just said? It's not a mere ministerial matter. It's ministerially critical that Joe fill that out. And then they take 1 year, our engineer sitting here will get a road to Shannon, we'll get a road that Broadhurst can use, and then they can take it up to the Elks, and that district can live. And what are you doing? You got me coming here when I'm sick, just out of the hospital with a stroke. And you've got me telling you, when are you going to wake up? Show me once we've cheated this town any place. We're the ones that cleaned up the Bureau of Mine, filthy entrance to this city. We're the ones that cleaned up the scablands, and after paying through our nose for 5 years, gave it to the Fish and Wildlife. That's why you've got your refuge. All of a sudden, we're public enemy number one. We're public enemy number one because Keith May doesn't like us. And when I blew the whistle on him on Walmart, because they were trying to get that $60 million, he's been after my family ever since. And even ODOT's getting a little sick of it. Now, what I'm trying to tell you folks is I wouldn't take the fun of beating on us because we did what the staff wanted us to do, and it was a mistake. You're going to get where you're going to be in a huge lawsuit if we bring those out, because then you have a spacing problem. You need to get and do it through an answer tonight and question. And there's another thing I kind of want to casually mention. The National Surface Station Retail Code done by the American Society of Planning Officials, I wrote that. I got a gold medal when I was teaching at University of British Columbia. The San Diego sign code that went up to the Supreme Court and changed the law, I wrote that. I've forgotten more about code writing than this staff will ever know. I worked for the union for 20 years in lawsuits, so the American worker had a chance to make product. And I'm asking you tonight, I'm willing to sit here and tell you the questions to answer and the questions to get so everyone benefits. As to these people, the neighbors, why weren't they there when Cedarbrook Way caused this trouble? Because Cedarbrook Way in the rear cut us off from the highway. ODOT said we couldn't open it up. ODOT will not take any traffic off of Swanstrom and that other street, or they will close our easements. But any traffic we generate on that 6 acres is fine. So I'm sitting here saying, why don't you look at who your friends are? Why don't you look at the people that have worked on your budget committee? And why don't you seriously look at negligent misrepresentation and find a way out of it so the neighbors aren't squawking about traffic going where it should have never gone? And other than that, I don't want to tell you. This is the most frustrating thing. I don't want to see Joe in more trouble. He needs access. Ken Shannon's not doing anything. He's too sick with cancer. They're limping along. Ken, you can't talk to him. He's that sick. And for some of you wonder how long we've been in this town. My kid was on the football team with Shannon's team when they were going to the state. I've known Ken for years and years. And his boy has got his own family, his own kids now. He's worked for G&E 20 years. But that's not what this is about, because Mays doesn't like me. He shut that zone down on the highway. And you know something? When I came out of Stanford and Berkeley, I went into building. I was a big, big builder in what you call Silicon Valley. At 45 years old, I retired with literally hundreds of acres in the Central Valley. Then the government decided they were going to kill the Kesterson National Wildlife Reservoir with wastewater. I lost 8.5 years and every penny I had. That's why Robert Wagner came up here. He did that thing for Fox with Olivia Newton-John. See who I married was Olivia Newton-John. You didn't know that. And all of a sudden, I'm going to screw my neighbors and cheat people? Give me a break.
You want to reserve
Yep,
time?
that's it. Okay. You can now let the other people testify.
So I have, in order, people in favor of the application, and I have one that is checked, both proponent and opponent. So we'll start with Corey Pratek. Piatek.
You do butcher names.
I married. I married into a shorter name so I could pronounce it. All right.
Everybody hear me?
Yep, and just start with your name and address for the record.
Corey Piatek in 22083 Southwest Hines Place in Sherwood. Just a couple questions that have come up about it. I realized after the last meeting, a lot of people thought I was completely against it. I just want to say I'm not against it. I just want to make sure that as a neighbor living around it, we're not losing our access to our own neighborhood and our own space that we paid for, just so that the other space can go in. One of the questions I had is, if this property was starting to be built as a commercial space, would the access to the property still be allowed to be just on the road through our neighborhood? Or would, if somebody looked at this as just a completely commercial space, would the access have to be different, either primarily through the highway or through the other cross street over the bridge that doesn't seem to be able to exist? It just seems like if it looking at it as just a residential space changes than if we look at it as a commercial space. And if this is to be zoned as commercial, it seems like that should be taken into account of what the real intent of this property is. Other question is, there's a green space along the east side of the property that I heard it was kind of mentioned earlier, but there was no real detail of it. On the early maps, it showed the green space still being there, and on the new maps, it does not show the green space being there. We're trying to figure out what changed in that.
Okay.
Wasn't sure if there was any answers to that, but that was kind of the question, is that we were told initially, years and years ago, that the green space was a permanent green space and was not going to go away, and it doesn't seem to exist on any of the new maps. So that's kind of there's a lot of us wondering and trying to ask that.
You have other questions?
That was primarily it.
Okay, so, and we can have staff or the applicant respond to where the green space is. That one's a pretty easy one. The one regarding the access, I think that's a complicated one, and we'll defer to after other people have a chance to testify.
Okay.
I would be curious, because I haven't seen any map that has not had that green space annotated on it, so I don't know where that information would have come from.
And I would just recommend, in the essence of time, that we get through all of the questions, and then staff and or the applicant can respond to all the questions rather than.
Okay, and I agree, we will be, so I have two questions written down from you, and we'll have to make sure that if the applicant doesn't answer, we'll make sure staff answers questions as best as we can. Thank you. All right. Next is Kevin Fink.
Just one, the one with the cars on it.
Just made copies this evening.
And does the applicant have copies of this exhibit?
Yeah. It's their parking plan.
I made altercations.
But he had alternate, he added.
It's not
some-
their one is part of their one. I've added cars to it so you can see our neighborhood against their neighborhood.
Okay, yeah, it's a little bit more broad, yes. Thank you. All right, so.
My name's Kevin Fink.
Thank you.
And my address is 22118 Southwest Hale Place, Sherwood. And I've been here since 1998, and I came out here because I wanted to get as far away from the city as I possibly could. That's why I love it here. And I don't know if all of you all know this, but the city of Sherwood made the top 10 national ranking for best small cities to live in the U.S. multiple times. And I take pride in that. And I feel like we're kind of losing that a little bit here. And that's why I in total respect towards the family here of the property. Personally, I don't like all the laws that we have and all the regulations. I think they should be allowed and to do whatever they want to do on their own property and make as much money as they want on their own property. But when it starts impacting my property is when I start getting concerned. Now, we all knew that this was commercial property, so you can't argue that. They can build whatever they want to build there. But when you're looking at that picture there that I got, that's cars coming into my neighborhood. And that's where I decide, well, wait a minute. The city's changing a law here, and so I'm paying tax money just like everybody else here is, and I'm relying on you all here to defend me and look out for our city's best interests. And you're making an exception to the law and regulation that you already have in place for them to make the lot size smaller, saying new presidents for the rest of the city that they can now have whatever size lot they want. And so I'm just questioning that because you're setting this new precedence. And
when you're making that exception, the deal was that you were supposed to get something in return. You're not getting anything in return. They're not building this crossing like they said that they were originally, sorry, maybe that was miscommunication, what you guys thought you were going to receive. And so who's going to pay for that crossing? I'm sorry, but I don't trust that this will all just happen. I would like to see it in a plan, because that's why it's called a plan. And so who's paying for the crossing? The city, that's right. And that's us. That's me. That's everybody here. It's millions of dollars to build that kind of bridge. It's crazy. So let me get this straight. I've got to pay millions of dollars now, so does every one of my neighbors here, and all of you. And you're allowing a special circumstance for them to build this property with tiny houses stacked up super high so that they can make a lot of money. But what's the benefit to the city? And the other thing is that these houses, you're allowing them to put commercial underneath them, right? So if you look at that parking map that I just sent out to you, that's like normal parking, maybe parties, and the car size is not to scale. But you will see that where's the customers of these places going to park?
There's no commercial underneath the house.
Well, that's what you're zoning this for. You're saying that they're allowed to put, this whole property is allowed to put businesses in these houses. So if they do that, where's the customers parking? And so that's my concern. They're coming into my neighborhood. Personally, I don't care what you guys do on the property. Do what you want. But because you're coming into our property, all these cars are coming in. It's already a fire hazard where we live right now, because if there's cars on two sides, a fire truck can't get through. That's a huge concern to me. Every time I'm teaching my kid how to drive around the corner, I have to tell him almost stop, because there's cars there and it's very dangerous. And now you're gonna bring more cars in there, and I just feel like I'm losing the small time feel, and that's why I came here. Sorry.
All right, thank you very much. All right. Next is Sharon Thompson.
Hi, I'm Sharon Thompson. I live at 17911 Southwest Swanstrom, which is the last homely home before you get to the entrance to this subdivision. And my concern is the parking situation and just why in the world are we doing high density? If you look at the lots on the map that we have, the lots backing up to this new subdivision, it looks like you're squeezing almost 3 houses, 2.5 houses, into the same size area that one lot is currently in the existing buildings. I would really prefer, as a person in the neighborhood will be affected by this, that we build homes that are comparable to the ones that are already existing. Just regular density, I'm not sure what the technical term is, but the regular density as opposed to the high density, because you're just going to create tremendous amount of traffic there on these streets, and a real parking issue because of all the extra traffic and cars. So I'm not against the subdivision per se, but I am against the really high density and narrow driveways. So that's my concern.
Okay. Thank you very much. Corey Anderson.
Corey Anderson, 17890 Southwest Hanley Street in Sherwood. The first one is a question. Is my property is right behind Jim's, and with the proposed site, is how many feet will be the house behind me compared to from the back of my fence to the first house? Based on what we saw before, it was about 15 feet. And if that's true, or if it's 15 to 20, I get outside my back patio and I'm going to see a building like we have right behind us, 3 stories high. Just the question that I don't need an answer for right now. But we have 27 homes being built in that area. And again, as was stated, about less than 5,000 square feet. That's a lot of homes and it's a lot of people coming in and out of one area right at the entrance on Stein. And as was stated earlier, it sounds like the Cedar Brook crossing may happen, may not. So we're going to have, as I mentioned last time, we're going to have probably, I'm just estimating, maybe 40 cars, 40, 50 cars. I mean, there's spots for 89 right now, but coming in and out of one area on Stein. As I mentioned last time, that's a hairball right now between Stein and Hanley Street and Swanstrom. With the high school being open up in a year, you've got traffic's going to increase substantially in Hanley. Then you've got additional traffic from the proposed site going on to Stein on to Hanley. As I mentioned before, there's only a stop sign right now on Stein and Hanley. A majority of the people don't stop there because I check them. In fact, if you want, I'd be welcome. You can come out on an afternoon and we can sit on my front porch and you can see how many cars don't stop at that stop sign. So it's more of I understand what Jim wants to do. I totally get it. But we have to look at the safety of the people too. I guess my question is, what's more important? The tax revenue that's going to happen or the safety of the people? Just the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I currently do not have any other blue forms indicating that anybody else wants to testify this evening. If you have changed your mind and want to participate by testifying this evening, please come up with your blue card. And then just for clarification, because I know sometimes these go late and people don't always get to stay to the end, this is, again, a recommendation to the City Council. The City Council will have a full de novo hearing, correct? And at that time, the council will also take additional public testimony. So, correct? Yes. Okay. All right. I just didn't want people to think this was, one shot and they're done. We are only making a recommendation to council, and council will have another hearing. So, okay. So we have 9 minutes and 29 seconds left on the applicant's time. If you like to come up and provide rebuttal testimony, that would be great.
One of the questions that one of the citizens had was about about our capital improvement project. Is there any way our city engineer can explain that there's SDCs that are collected and all of that? So he thinks that yeah, okay. So as long as it doesn't come out of his pocket, that gentleman's pocket, so.
Okay.
Go ahead if you want.
Well, I just wanted to thank staff for, putting together a good summary of the changes, and we worked with them to prepare our pattern book and the parking plan to answer the questions that you had before. And one thing that I was noting, Commissioner Kai asked about the tax base. Okay, we're going back to commercial, and multifamily is a part of commercial. And under the multifamily component, we are exceeding the minimum requirements for density. And so the tax base is level. We are meeting the tax base for commercial, but we're also meeting the residential component that's needed for the community. And we're leaving a fairly large parcel up front for general commercial that we will be using hopefully within the next 2 years.
So I don't want to interrupt you, but my question wasn't or didn't pertain to that regarding tax base. It was just the statement that residential per unit costs the city more to have versus the income that it generates.
Okay, but again, but multifamily is a part of the commercial. Again, multifamily is a part of the commercial component of the city. So they are like benefits. And we are meeting the minimum density requirements for multifamily, even though we are doing single family, which is really preferable for the general public over, for the citizens of the city over multifamily, which we could also do under the previous zoning. And when I looked at the previous zoning, I said to the clauses, this doesn't represent anything that you can develop. And we came up with the concept plan for the commercial development with a sustainable single-family component to it that is really a very nice concept. And I've designed communities, subdivisions, with the same concept that we have right here. They're all over the metropolitan area. Now, as far as the code, we talked about, someone said that we weren't meeting the intent of the law. Well, it's the intent of the code. And on the parking, we are more than meeting the intent of the code. We are tripling what the intent of the code is. We will have 5 parking spaces, if you include the garages, for every unit. As far as the size of the lots under multifamily, we would have even, I believe, lower setbacks to the adjoining properties. Same thing with commercial. We're looking for a hybrid of the setbacks. And yes, we are looking at 15-foot setbacks in the backyard. City of Portland allows down to 7 feet. And I know you don't want to be the city of Portland. That's why we went with the 15 feet as this hybrid concept. As far as traffic through the neighborhood, the reason we're going with residential versus commercial apartments, high-density apartments, 24 units per acre, is it generates less traffic. And we will generate with this proposal significantly less traffic than commercial, full-on commercial development or multifamily. These are single-family homes, and they do not generate as much traffic as high-density multifamily or commercial. So I think that we're a good hybrid, a good buffer between the single-family and what will be general commercial along the highway. It's a nice transition. We on the Cedar Brook Way, we don't know how that's going to come out. On the entrances to the highway, either on this project or in the future, or on Shannon's property, where it goes, we don't know. We just want to help solve the situation. And for those properties to fully develop, and that is Shannon, Broadhurst, and the Elks property, they need access. They don't have any right now. It's and they need sewer and water, and we are bringing all that to our boundary so they can start thinking about developing that really prime piece of property between Meineke and Sunset. It's just Elward. It's really prime and will generate a lot of tax revenue for this city. Do you have anything further to?
No, I'm assuming they have questions.
There was also a discussion about the vegetated corridor, and we have not changed that. What it might be that he's seeing is we only have essentially, we have about half the vegetated corridor, and then the Doyles have an easement for the other half on the eastern side of the proper boundary line. So it's much wider than it actually looks on paper if you look at the two components put together. We haven't changed that. We have a service provider letter from Clean Water Services, and it identifies what our corridor is.
And part of the information that we gave to you today too is to show the Doyle property and show the easement that's on there that's already pre-existing. So you have a bit bigger picture.
Okay, I don't have anything else to say.
Anything?
So I think we answered Corey.
I want to say, do you understand?
Come on up.
Use the microphone so everybody can hear you too.
If you pull this stuff, we'll take whatever development you get, we will sue, and we will build the front, and we will lock out the neighbors. And I will tell them, Gene, you and Keith won against everybody but us, because you're trying to shut that district down. You have been ever since I've known you, and your questions here tonight are embarrassing. Don't you understand you have a problem out there? You should petition Joe Gall immediately. There should be a study group, and they should come back to you with recommendations. Bob would come up with a good road scheme. You'd have that whole area opened up, and you wouldn't be screwing all of your neighbors, so Langer's got the upper hand. I mean, I can't even understand what possesses you people and the neighbors when we react what you do to us. They come in and complain. Why weren't they here when you put that phony Cedar Brook Way in? You lied to us about it. It didn't do anything to those, and we tried to work with you around it. What did we get? Another $100,000 of lost money for nothing. And all kinds of contention with neighbors that don't understand up. I don't even believe we're in this meeting. We responded to what you told us to do. They said, okay, we made a mistake. Where's the rescission clause? Every other town in Metro has an automatic rescission for mutual mistake. Well, we don't have one. We follow APA. Hitler would be proud. It's ridiculous. You can't back out of a mistake you made. You're punishing us. We're going to take steps and punish the neighbors, and nobody is asking your professionals, how do we design out of this while we can? Means sad.
All right.
Are you waiving the rest of your time?
No.
28 seconds? Yes.
Okay. So, in the questions that were asked by the people that testified, there was the question about the proposed site, what is the backyard setback, and the applicant responded that the proposal will be 15 feet. Provided clarification regarding the green space and that it still exists, and that is, as the applicant stated, part of the Clean Water Services purview, and so they won't. Clean Water Services is Clean Water Services. That setback is on the map, and that is there. And if it's the previous
That they're in charge of green space.
that the green space still exists on the map based on Clean Water Services. That didn't change.
Oh, it's not quite that simple. Because number one,
We don't do
and
this.
this is answering your question, some years ago, when they put that in, Jim App built a road out there. Thank you, Jim. Roy Priest built it. It's set back that, and we do not have any of the wetlands problem Doyle has, because Synnex, with all their big lawyers, all their big people, got away with murder.
Jim, she was just answering their questions, which says that the green space is still there. That's all it was.
It's good, yeah.
That's all it was.
We can't go beyond it.
Okay, and the other.
But, you know, but also we're getting.
Point of order.
Okay.
For the first time. They're in there rebuilding the drain.
Right.
Okay. So, the last question that was asked by a member of the public was regarding, and it's a good question, if it's converted to general commercial in through the zone change, there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, which makes it confusing about general commercial with residential uses versus if they just revert the zone back to general commercial and it's developed as general commercial without all the other part of the application, where would the applicant take their access from? And I'm looking.
It's an ODOT.
I guess it's a really impossible question to answer because it really depends on what the development is, what ODOT, I mean, Bob can chime in. We don't know because we don't know how the development would be proposed. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I could think of at least 4 or 5 different ways this development could go, just really quickly.
Okay.
So trying to say that the access could be taken this way, I could give you 4 other options to go the other way.
Okay, so there's no answer.
Really, for us, if you want to make it commercial, give us a plan showing how you're going to develop it.
And that's not what's
and
before us.
we respond to what is presented.
It's just not zoning it commercial. It's zoning it commercial and then developing it as a commercial site, because zoning it commercial, as it was once zoned, allows for high-density apartments to be built as secondary units anyway. So I think everybody needs to understand that. When all you folks bought your property, it was zoned commercial if you bought it before 2016.
Comments from the public have clarified that there are people who have purchased in the time when it was MDRH. So that
yeah, that's true. That's what I said. If you bought it before, it was rezoned.
Before, yeah.
When it was MDRH.
in a border.
So I have a point of order question. So right now, the public hearing is still open. What would be appropriate would be for the Planning Commission to ask any remaining questions you have of the applicant, and then you can ask questions of staff, and then close the public hearing and
Correct,
deliberate.
I understand, but
Okay.
the applicant left the table,
Right,
and
I
I don't think it's appropriate to have answers being shouted from the floor that are not on microphone, because we have people that can participate by watching it on TV or reading the recordings, and so we need to have the applicant at the table if we're going to continue to ask questions of the
I
applicant.
got a question for him. Is that what you want us to do?
No, I was just going to just sort of friendlyly stress that it's a question that the Planning Commission asks as
Right.
well, so.
Yeah, so I go back to the language where it says otherwise clearly secondary to the commercial buildings. And since there's no commercial buildings proposed, it seems like one way to read this is secondary to the commercial buildings that may be there and which you cannot see now. And so if the proposal would say, I think you have 3 point some odd acres left over. Some of that is
road.
1.9 of buildable land as a total, because it's a 5.9
Yeah.
acre site. 2.66 is going into residential, which would leave 3.25 in gross.
1.9.
Is it 1.9?
1.9.
Okay, 1.9. So my question is how do I weigh the secondary use if I can't even see a proposed building?
There's a whole list of uses in the general commercial.
No, right, but it doesn't say that. It says commercial building, so I don't know how to weigh that secondary use. That's just my one issue.
So one of the questions that you had last time was provide us a pattern book for the commercial site.
Right.
So that's what we have done, and it talks about the heights of the structures, the layout of the structures, the windows, the banding, all of that. And also, you have to understand the clauses are currently commercial, and they use the property as commercial. It had a restaurant on it. There are buildings out front.
It's just this funny language. I don't know why it says commercial buildings instead of commercial zoning. Because I can't say something secondary to a commercial building if there's either no planned commercial building or no existing commercial building that would make it secondary. As to the rest of the application, I am mad that the city ever rezoned it, because you split zoning on the same piece of properties, in my opinion, and I'm just one person, moronic at best. I would probably put a minimum lot size of 2,500. What would that do to your development if I said minimum lot size 3,000 or 2,500?
So I asked
What's
a
the
point of order
lowest?
before we go there. That's redoing their application
2,400.
for them.
No, I'm just asking.
2,400 is the
Okay.
lowest.
Okay, so,
Yeah, yeah, well, it's not going to ever be zero. I mean,
right,
that
well,
was
you
one of the
can't because of
questions.
setbacks.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And,
So there'd be nothing on the lot if it were
Right.
zero.
well, that was a question that came up in the last hearing. And we have examples. We also put in the record the plats from all of the other small lot subdivisions that have already gone in, that everybody can drive by every single day and see the functionality of those small lots. And again, I hope nobody forgets the whole idea of what's driving all of this, and what has been driving all of this from the beginning is this Cedar Brook Way that is still a phantom road.
Unless we approve this, then it's no longer a phantom road because you're going to have to deed some of it over.
Mark, the problem with the question you're asking is, and Julie and I have had a number of conversations where I've asked her a direct question. Who told you Cedar Brook Way took away our easements? You made that statement. You did. Now,
I didn't.
Well, of course you didn't. Neither did Marty Ginswald now. Neither did Mario Danielson. Nobody wants to say we committed slander of title. Nobody's that dumb. But in a meeting, they made it. So we made a mistake of trusting the staff.
No, I understand what you're saying about the zoning stuff. I'm just saying.
So we come in here, and we've spent God knows how much money trying to meet the staff's needs. And what did we find out? ODOT said, look, we know we made a mistake, so if you only take these few houses, 29, and you take them out the back, we won't say anything. But you can never put them on those easements at the front. They've already said that. They'll shut us down. So now we're sitting in a situation that never should have occurred, but occurred because we trusted everybody. Now, the minute McElroy...
Jim, I already said I suggested that the rezoning needs to happen. Okay, that's my personal opinion. Cedar Brook Way, what you propose needs to happen too because of the connectivity and getting people around that. That needs to happen. I don't have any problems with any of that, what you've proposed. My problem is something a little different. And so I agree the rezone needs to happen, the change to multifamily to residential should happen, and the minimum lot size, we should have a minimum lot size. I don't know what the group wants to do with that, but those are my issues, just so you know.
Well, and
So
to answer your
before we go into
question,
deliberation,
just, yeah.
let's ask a specific question
Yeah.
so that we can move on. We are going to be very late, and if we want to have some sort of completion this evening, we have to continue.
Amen.
You have
So-
to do this, or we need to ask if you're willing to toll the 120 days so that we can have the opportunity to finish asking staff and doing our deliberation.
What did you ask for?
She's just saying they want to get it done. Go ahead and get it done.
Personally, I don't wish to extend this hearing at
Let's
the planning
ask some
commission level.
questions and get this over with then.
Okay, so then we need to.
And it's not surprising, the only thing I was going to say to Mark, it's not surprising in this code that is so wormy that we've been spending we're going to be spending close to $1 million to get it fixed. It doesn't surprise me one single bit that there's a quirk like that here you are with all of the different parts of the codes, and all of a sudden you have something that doesn't totally make sense.
So my question is, why is the current zoning unworkable? That was in your application. Are you able?
You can get 14 lots. 12 lots with the current zoning.
Right, so and that's what was presented, and that's what we did the zone change on based on the preliminary plat that was presented in the previous hearing, and that's what's in the record, that it was platted for medium density
So
high.
So you're back to the old zoning.
Well, the
That was
zoning-
based on a lot of information that was wrong. And we were encouraged because there was still nothing going to happen about Cedar Brook Way. And they said the only part that would technically be developable would be the part on the other side of this road that still didn't have the alignment.
still didn't have the complete profile on it, and they were still even talking about how it was going to line up with the edge of where the Doyle property is. So once you got into the nuts and the bolts of it, it's not workable.
It's just not workable. Now, what it is workable is you could attempt to put those lots in and then sue. Because Cedar Brook Way is an exaction. Will you understand? We don't want it. We didn't need it. We fought it. We paid $150,000 to Syntex to keep a fire exit, to get sewer, so that we wouldn't run into exactly what the staff said we ran into, which we didn't. It was negligent misrepresentation. ODOT came along and said, no, they misunderstood. So we're coming here and saying, give us a break. We've been here 40 years. We'd like to build it out. And you keep wanting to slap us back another, to the point, do you understand the whole reason when you put in a street and you put in them for 12 houses, you're dividing the streets over 12 houses. You understand there's going to be no money left because your infrastructure is going to cost you there about $125,000, and he will tell you that. By the time we finish the loan and the bank, it's a great effort that we made to get our money back for putting in the streets. How did it happen? Your staff screwed up, and Mackler unscrewed them, and we tried to move forward, and we're still sitting here and can't leave, can't retire, can't do a damn thing because nobody wants to look at what you did to us.
Okay, thank you for the answer. Does anybody else have any other questions for the applicant?
I have questions of staff and in the interest of.
Well, if it's questions of staff, we close the public
Okay,
hearing.
then let's do that.
Can I just ask a quick question
Yes.
for the applicant?
Yes.
So, if I understand correctly, what you're saying is you want the zone change because the lot sizes under the general commercial would allow you to develop the way that the plan shows, right? Maximizing that the existing zone would prevent you from doing as many. Is that correct?
So what this whole effort is a whole lot of effort at mitigating the devastation from the road of splitting our road.
I understand, but the PUD.
And you need the zoning that we had before. That zoning has to go back, and there's no revision in the code. There's no rescission in the code. So that's why we're back here. It didn't work with the zoning change that we were advised to do earlier. We want the zoning back because that was not functional and not workable.
Okay.
So, is that what you're asking?
My point is that you want it to go back to general commercial because there are certain things in the code that would allow you to use the HDR classification, and then you're asking for additional edits to the code to shrink the lot sizes a little bit more. Is that correct? The point I'm trying to get at is if we left it at the current zone, but then we approved the changes to the code to shrink the lot sizes, would that be something you'd be amenable to because you could still get the number of lots that you need?
Can't do the density.
You can't do it that way.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions of the applicant? All right, thank you then. All right, then we're going to go ahead and close the public testimony part of this and ask questions of, so we have final comments by staff and then questions of staff. So does staff have any comments before we ask any questions?
To me, it seems, if I could, it seems like if we want to read the code as the staff's interpret it as to this commercial buildings, we should really recommend that the code be modified to say commercial zoning so we can get rid of that is it a building we're balancing it against, or is it a zoning we're balancing against?
But we don't have that in front of us.
I know that, but
We didn't notice
but
it.
my point would be, if we move this on to council, the council could say, we're going to interpret that consistently, and that's a code change that we need to make it all consistent. That's my only point, because right now, balancing it with this, I don't get there from here, because I think that means commercial buildings means either proposed or not proposed.
Currently, I support the way that it is written, as written, because it provides that benefit to the city, to the community, of actually having that commercial, not just the zoning, but of having the commercial building in place that's generating revenue, that's servicing our community.
I understand.
And I think that is the intent of what it was written.
I mean, that's reasonable.
So I'm going to propose that we ask questions of staff, and then we're going to have to take each one of the applications separately. It's one application, but 4 decisions that have to be made for recommendation. And so I have questions in Scrivener, and there's this page 35 or whatever has a reference that's completely erroneous. Page 25 has a typo, and page 28 says reference error.
And page 28, that first sentence that says reference error, we can just strike out that entire sentence.
So page 28, it has in the middle, error reference source not found. So you're stating that the staff's comments are not changed by the removal of the entire sentence?
Correct.
Is there a condition that requires a PUD? I mean, not a PUD, but a homeowner association for this group?
Yes,
Okay.
there is a condition for that.
Okay.
Actually, I think it wasn't just a homeowners association. I thought it was
It was they can either provide a homeowners association or a private entity.
Right, to take care of the
take
park
care
and stuff
of
like that.
the open spaces.
Okay, that's the only question I have.
So I don't know what page number you want me to reference, 41 of 101 or page 58?
The number that's the
41 of 101?
The big number. We'll
the big number?
always use
Okay.
the total packet page number.
Okay. 58?
58.
Is somewhere in here, I think it's number 7. Is this a condition that would meet the concerns about changing it to general commercial and not complying with the code as it's written for clearly secondary, the residential? That's what I'm looking for.
So number 7, it states that the proposed development or an independent phase of the development could be substantially completed within 1 year from the date of approval. So we're looking at the first phase to be developed, to at least to have them start the development within the first year of.
Oh, okay.
And nothing on phase 2
Nothing
required.
on phase 2.
So there's nothing on phase 2 being required that would not satisfy the concern about clearly secondary to a commercial building?
So what would happen, sorry, I just want to clarify. So that commercial component on lot 28, when they propose development for commercial uses on that lot, it will come back to Planning Commission for final site plan approval as part of this PUD process.
I understand, but
It could be in 10 years.
yeah, the code is written the way it is right now, and we need to comply with the code as it's written. So, okay.
So do you have any other general questions before we take each one of the parts separately?
There were 2 questions that I had of staff, and the first one was in regards to the original zone change from general commercial to MDRH. Was that done at the request of the property owner, or did the city instigate that?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Initiate.
It was an application by the property owner to make that change. I'm not sure that the the history of how the application came to be, it fits into any of the criteria for this particular rezone.
And that's sufficient as far as an answer that I was looking for. Thank you. And my other question was, if again, during the applicant's testimony, there was talk that Cedarbrook Way could not be built over as far as a bridge or connection. Is that true, Bob?
Again, I can think of at least two separate methodologies used where I would never even touch the wetland. Might be in the vegetated corridor, but not touch the wetland. And that's allowed. So I could do it technically and make it work.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. So the first item is the map amendment, which is what we call the zone change. So, starting with Vice Chair Kai, just getting your comments and...
We're in deliberations now then?
Correct.
Okay.
Taking a polling of
Right.
we've...
No, I agree.
So what's your, just starting with the Vice Chair on the zone change that's before us?
So, in my perspective, I feel the zone change, the revision back to general commercial is unnecessary given what the property owner's intent currently is. Since their desire is to build housing, I feel that MDRH fully allows for that. And most importantly, MDRH is most consistent and compatible with the adjacent and existing properties and neighborhood. In my MDRH already allows for a range of density that the property owners could take advantage of, even beyond the existing neighborhood and community. But I feel that would be far more compatible with the existing neighborhood. And beyond that, allowing a zone change back to general commercial combined with the owner's desire for reduced setbacks, I feel will unfairly and impact adjacent property owners essentially forever. I believe it's just not something that I'm in support of recommending.
Other poll of the rest of the commission for the PUD going forward is recommending approval, recommending
change. You said PUD, but...
What'd I say?
You said
A PUD,
Yeah.
zone change, zone change. I'm gonna write zone change. Zone change, just the poll for the, we're going to have to vote on these separately.
So for me, it's difficult because they're combined. The zone change is part of essentially the PUD application in my mind, right? On its face, separately, on its own, the zone change I would have no issue with by itself. But then I would not, but because it's part of a PUD and they're looking, I agree with Commissioner Kai that the MDRH designation would still allow them to build residential units. So I'm kind of in a, if we're looking at it as part of the application for the PUD, I would say no for the zone change. But does that?
Yep.
Okay.
I would say rather than rezoning it to commercial, keep it with MDRH. I also think that kind of, it was brought up multiple times with having the commercial part, the residential second, and I think keeping it as an MDRH keeps it second rather than populating it with more homes. So I would not agree to rezone.
I'm also concerned about changing the zoning to
higher density given the area and then the commercial area in front of that as well. Right now, I don't see a reason as why the MDH does not work.
Okay, so I see, and Mark already, you can state again your support.
Let me tell you why I'm for it. And I appreciate all the citizens that voted. I've just been here too long, I suppose, but I was here when the minimum density was, I think, 10,000, then we went to 7,000, then went to 5,000, and every development that came in under the new zoning, the other neighbors would come and say, oh no, that's going to ruin our neighborhood. And the fact of the matter is we're going to more dense. And this is exactly the type of property that needs to be dense because it's sitting on the freeway, and we want to do a transitional from the freeway commercial on back to the residential. So I got no problem with the zone change. It is what it was and what it should have never been changed to, in my opinion. But I respect you guys' opinions. I think the problem is, and what I think Mr. Claus was getting at is I've done a bunch of developments, and it either maps out or it doesn't map out. I mean, if I can only do, I think under MDRH, I think they could only do about 14 units because it's 11 units, 12 units. Okay, so 12 units. And so financially, do we want this road to go in or don't we? And if we do, then we're going to have to allow the person that's paying for it to do it so that.
They're not paying for Cedarbrook. They're only putting extensions.
I know, but they're getting SDCs towards Cedarbrook that's going to go in because it's going to be, I believe it's going to be a collector of some sort, isn't it?
Cedarbrook Way is a collector status road.
Yeah, so
they'll be dedicating the right-of-way, half of it, and they will be getting credit for that dedication, which goes against the SDCs that they would pay on the housing unit cost.
Right, so we now know where the road's going to go.
But
so that's a big part of this whole.
But it's not. It's not that it's something that they would dedicate regardless of whether it's general
PUD or not, right?
The dedication of the right-of-way would be required by the code. It's in our TSP.
Right, it's been there for a long time.
It's been there for a long time.
So
changing the zone doesn't change the dedication, right?
Right, so, well, it does until they develop. They don't have to dedicate it.
Right. That's
right?
True.
Or when they do commercial, they could do a big box there and bounce it around, so it's not as desirable as we like. But, I totally respect what you guys have said. I think it's an abomination that this code allows, because, I own an acre and a half, so can I get half my property rezoned high density now? Because we allow, we allow dual zonings on one lot? That's crazy, in my opinion, but I'd be for the zone change without any problem.
Okay, so and again, I'm on the fence also because the zone change back to their general commercial is what it was before, but their argument for having the medium density residential high, changing it was very compelling because it created that buffer zone, because if it's developed fully as a general commercial property, you don't have a buffer between general commercial and the low density. And so when they brought the zone change in, it created that housing density buffer. And so that argument, I read the other application, and what they brought forth when they asked for the zone change initially was exactly that, was this buffer zone. So, and that's where I find that we are providing a better benefit, not a benefit, but community integrity by providing that transitional zone.
So, Chair Simpson, I know this is very challenging to do with this application because of it being a multi-part application. But I think it's important for the Commission to think about how the different parts interrelate to each other and to make their decisions accordingly, or the recommendations accordingly. So we have 4 pieces. We have the rezone, 2 text amendments, and a PUD. In order for the PUD to be approvable, all 3 of the other parts have to be approved. But to the extent that it's possible, and I understand this is difficult to untangle, you should be looking at the criteria for each of those pieces separately and making your recommendation for each piece separately. So you're not making your recommendation on the rezone based on your concerns about the PUD.
And that's what I was trying to.
I'm not saying that you're doing that. I'm just saying I'm hearing a lot of confusion on the commission about, I feel this way, but I also feel this way because it's fitting into this overall application.
Right, and
to the
that's
extent you can.
so. In my statement, as an island decision, changing it back to general commercial takes it away from what our intention was when we zone changed it, which was providing for a buffer. So putting it back to general commercial takes away what the community has come to expect, which is a transitional period from general commercial to a higher density to a lower density. And if the entire acreage is general commercial, there's no buffer. So they would have the opportunity to put a big box right next to, if the other three things don't happen and all we are able to recommend for approval tonight is the zone change and the rest of the thing goes away and the zone change happens, is that in the best interest of the community? And the arguments that were presented in the previous application for the zone change, in my opinion, were more compelling in creating a buffer zone.
Minimum lot size.
So do we want, so is it appropriate for us to take a vote on the PUD before we,
Well,
or for the zone change?
Can I ask Josh a quick question?
Yes.
So say each of the first three go through and then, right, just for argument's sake, and then we get to the PUD and then I apply my concern about the clearly secondary language in the code to the PUD because I said okay to the zone change.
Right.
Is that appropriate?
Yes.
Okay, because, that's why if I apply each piece alone by itself, then I don't necessarily have an issue with changing it back to the original zone designation, but it then violates the code on the PUD application because it's not clearly secondary in my mind.
That's why we should vote them separately as independent actions and then bring them all together with the PUD. I think that's what
That's what I'm saying. So, for example, if you're talking about clearly secondary, that should have no relevance to your
The
decision
zone change.
on the zone
Okay.
change. Right.
All right. Then I will change my opinion. If we have to do them individually based on the merit of the piece itself without the outside stuff, then I don't have an issue with the zone change. Just all by itself on its little island.
Allowing the applicant to go back to the zoning that was in place.
So, Gene, do you want a motion one way or the other for the zone change and let it live or die on the motion and then move to the second issue, or do you want to do this polling on each separate one before we make any motions?
I'm desperately seeking assistance from
You can
staff
really
to
do
know
it
how's
either
the
way. Do you have any preference?
No, I
don't-
was going to say the exact same thing. I think ultimately you're going to forward a recommendation, and I think you can do motions. You could potentially go back, and if you totally change your mind, you could amend a motion or something.
Since the PUD cannot move forward without all of these pieces going together, would it be simpler for us to vote on it, just all the pieces?
We're just advising them, and so we need to advise the council on each individual issue, because whether we vote for it or against it, it still moves to the council.
Right, because this issue is site-specific. The next two questions will impact the entire city. So to make a collective pass or fail would, I think...
Not help the city council in making their determination. So let me just do this. I move that we forward to the city council a recommendation for approval of the zone change. If it gets a second, it gets a second. If it doesn't, it dies.
Is there a second to the motion? The motion dies. Okay. Then, do we have a motion for recommending of a denial?
So moved.
Is there a second on that motion?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we recommend to the city council the zone change be denied. Further discussion? And when we make that further discussion, we need to direct staff to, because they're recommending approval. If we're going to recommend denial, we need to explain what the criteria for our denial is.
I mean, my primary issue is the general, as you stated, Chair Simpson, that going back to general commercial would do away with that buffer, and in my opinion, that makes it less compatible versus the MDRH zoning that it currently is. And furthermore, another primary issue that I have with the intent to return to general commercial is the lack of intent to build commercial. And as we talked about, it's understanding that while it's allowed within general commercial, again, the issue of residential needing to be secondary to a commercial piece, I think is another significant portion that's missing. And again, stated City Council's intent on looking at increasing our tax base in that sense of increasing commercial versus purely residential. This is in direct conflict with that, because we have no idea when the commercial may or may not be, or if it would ever materialize.
So if I'm going to speak up, and Erica, totally correct me if you don't agree. Just in the essence of time, I think you guys, it's good to articulate your issues. You already did a little bit, and so if you wanted to add to it, that's fine. But I think that we took, at least I took, and I'm sure Erica did too, kind of notes as you were explaining your concerns. And then I think with what you guys said, staff would be able to explain in the staff analysis portion of a recommendation to the City Council what your concerns were. And I think really for the map amendment, your concerns are the criteria 2 and criteria 3. That's really in terms of like the existing demonstrable need, and then that it's timely considering the pattern of development. And I think.
So you feel you have enough?
Erica, you tell me if you think you've got enough to forward.
Policy 1 within the residential is maintaining the integrity of the community, which is a buffer zone. I guess that's.
And I agree with that. Without knowing what's on the commercial side, the buffer zone, that's why I'm saying it needs to be there. Keep it as it's.
Because the standalone part of this is that the zone change would enable any general commercial property development to occur up to the zone, to the property line to the back, which is low density residential. And with this process being separated, we don't have guarantee that they're going to, and that's where I got confused again, that the policy says multifamily is what is going to be in the general commercial area, but then we later on say it's not going to be multifamily. So we are contradicting ourselves in our own policies. So I'm going to ask Josh one more question about this. This is why I was wondering if we could bring this back to the Planning Commission, because we're going to make temporary findings based on comments that we're making, and staff is going to draft our recommendation without review from the Planning Commission to the council. So what we say this evening won't be reviewed by the planning, what staff writes won't be reviewed by the Planning Commission as a whole. In normal, so two things. One, in the site plan, it's normally not an issue because it's objective and we have clear and defined findings that we're able to articulate during the hearing. These are subjective, and usually with legislative matters we have more hearings, more input, and we get drafts of what's going to be presented to council before we're able to do that. So are there any,
We don't have to decide any of the legislative stuff within 120 days, just the PUD.
so the only way to do that within 120 days is to deny the PUD outright. So what Commissioner Cottle said, Mayor Cottle, for all intent, Commissioner.
Been a lot of things. People have other adjectives for me too.
Is that we have a 120-day rule in the state of Oregon that we have to comply with on site plan and PUD developments. And in order to make it through our hearings process and the council's hearing process, we have to complete it within 120 days. Legislative matters do not have that, and so we are under a time frame to expeditiously complete this. And Josh, you could just fill in with actual legal words at any time. We are all volunteers, by the way, up here, so we do this for
The fun of it.
the fun of it. And no,
Let's get a vote on what's going on so we can.
well,
The challenge is that the process is that this PUD needs to go to city council. And we do not have any time to spare in terms of meeting that 120-day clock.
Right.
We're going to be right at the edge of that. And we can't forward a recommendation to city council on just that piece because it hinges on these other three pieces. So we have to do it all at once. They can't hold a hearing on just the PUD piece without the other components.
the only way to hold the hearing on the PUD, which is in the 120-day rule, is to deny it because it doesn't meet the comprehensive plan and the code goals.
Unless we pass the other things. But yeah, but that's why I say, let's get back to.
They need to hold a hearing on all four components.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. It's difficult because we have to push it through. My comfort level is we are going to be, as a commission, not reviewing the staff recommendation on legislative matters before it goes to the council.
Right, I totally get it, yeah.
And we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't do that on the fence code. We get to see that how many
The
times
only
before we make a
opportunity-
legislative.
Too many times
And
is the answer.
Erica may not like this, but the only option I can think of in order to be able to do that would be a special meeting.
And that's
That's
always
a-
an option.
Yeah.
But
Another option that I'll throw out, and Colleen may kick me or council may kick me. Certainly you guys are conveying your analysis and Erica can, put that together as best she can. There's also the minutes as well as the videotape. We could, because we're not able to have the planning commission, sort of bless your findings, essentially, that you're forwarding to the planning or the council. Potentially we could make sure that they know, like, this is a summary, but please, for the full picture, watch the 3 hours of
2 nights of 3 hours.
I won't have to.
There you go. You're already here. Okay, so I'm just articulating that because
Yeah.
generally speaking, recommendations from the Planning Commission are drafted, they're objective, and the recommendation from the Planning Commission signed by the chair of the Planning Commission or the person that was the chair during the evening, and I won't have the ability to do that because I won't have the feedback from the rest of the commission on what is drafted by the staff.
So should we have a special meeting then?
No, we can
Or
always
would we-
read what the staff says, sends to
That's-
council. If we wanted to go testify, if it's important to us, we can go testify or give written comments to the council, right? Nothing prevents us from going to the council.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. So before we went any further, I just wanted it on the record that this process is expedited for the 120-day rule and that we normally would have another opportunity to review what staff is saying before it goes to council. So, all right, there is a motion on the table right now to recommend denial of the zone change, and we've provided comments to staff. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of recommending denial, say aye.
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 Those opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. The recommendation for denial is approved. We're going to go on to the next one, which is the text amendment to changed the language from multifamily to residential.
Just that one change.
We're doing them separately, because the.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
So the code section 6, that's the approval code. Whatever, started on page.
I just put it as proposal number 2.
Proposal number 2 then.
And this would just pertain to general commercial or HDR zone only?
Just general commercial to build it as
HDR. Okay.
So I really think that's a smart move. I'd love to see, personally, for the sake of the city, I'd rather have owner-occupied units than not owner-occupied units. So I would like us to move it from multifamily to residential, so people could you give them the option.
Well, I don't see, how having more options is
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine with this one.
Okay, so is there a motion?
I move. Second. He moved, I second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we recommend approval that the use table 16.22.020D within the commercial zone specifying that residential housing is not restricted to multifamily is changed to the phrase residential. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion pass. Okay. Item number 3, which is the second text amendment, which would
Lot size?
remove the sunset on the minimum lot size. Starting 46, 40.
So on page 47, staff added a recommendation of if we weren't comfortable with deleting it entirely, having 2,000 as a minimum lot size, which I would be okay with that as opposed to deleting it entirely.
So I have a question of council before we go further. The application that was presented did not propose this language. Are we? Thanks. I try to ask good questions. So we're not generally redoing applicants' work for them. So how does that?
So before Josh chimes in, let me give him so Eric and I talked about this a little bit this evening, and we're sort of bouncing back and forth, and it is legislative, and you change things in legislative processes at every public hearing, not every, but it is not uncommon for words to change within the proposed code changes through the course of both the Planning Commission and the council process. So it's certainly not, in our minds, not allowed. Whether or not you choose to do it is a different question, because this was an application versus a city-initiated type of code amendment.
And I guess in your statement, it was not city-initiated, it was applicant-initiated, and we noticed it for one thing without a lot of public.
Once the legislative issue's before us, we can do whatever we want with it. We can approve it, not approve it, change any word we want. We just have to give notice that we're considering it.
That's correct. I also.
But did we give notice that we're considering it?
You're considering a legislative change to this section of the code.
Yeah, that's all we have to say. We don't have to be specific.
As to what that change is?
Right. We don't.
I think we need to be.
Because it was noticed that we're considering removal of the sunset clause, not removing the sunset clause and adding the minimum 2,000 square feet that was recommended by staff.
That's sort of the benefit of when we say we're going to look at a text amendment to our code. We can look at anything within the previews of what we noticed, which is that code change. And what's proposed often doesn't happen. We change it all the way around all the time. We say we don't like that, we're going to do it this other way. We don't have to go back and re-notice saying, well, we're not going to do it that way, we're going to do it this other way. We just have to say, if you're interested in this code section, we're looking at it. And
For whatever it's worth, Erica, do you happen to have or recall the language from the notice? What specifically it would have said about the nature of the change being requested? I think it's also worth noting, my I don't think that it was explicitly addressed, but it sounded like the applicant was supportive of
Actually,
change.
2,400.
At least 2,400 as a, at least, right?
And I would just add, just from a, you do the notice because if people have concerns, you want to make sure that they know that they can testify. In this instance, if people didn't come and say, no, I don't want no minimum lot size, one could argue that they're probably not going to be concerned about a larger minimum lot size.
Correct.
So, in terms of just making sure that people who might have been concerned didn't have the goalpost changed. I don't think that's an issue in this case.
I think if it was the other way around, if we were noticing 2,000 and then we discussed
zero, maybe an
zero, I think that would be a material change to the notice provision of the code change. Whereas the way it is now, we're increasing it. So but
I think with the intent to be expeditious from this point on regarding the rest of the hearing, why don't we just, rather than trying to rewrite what is before us, let's just stick to what is before us.
Well, I think this minimum zone changes, lot size is before us.
But the discussion about what to change that to is, I also feel that that's just a broader general question that shouldn't necessarily be decided by us here right now. This is something that is being, really should be dealt with the comprehensive plan update, which is concurrently going
we're making
on.
a recommendation to the council on whether or not this specific issue should happen and whether the PUD is going to be approved. And so do we want to tell the council, we don't want it to be minimum, we'd like at least a minimum lot size. We don't want it to be zero, we want it to be at least a minimum, or do we want to just say to the council, we just rejected this one?
I'm of the latter. I'm not in support of further minimum lot
So
size.
let's take a poll. So we have Vice Chair Kai saying that he is not in favor of the sunset being removed.
Okay. I want it removed, and I'd like to put in at least a 2,000 minimum lot size.
I second. I agree.
Okay.
with who?
Minimum size lots.
And removing the sunset.
Removing the sunset.
Okay.
So, again, this goes back to if the intent of this text change amendment is to approve or reject the request of the applicant to remove the sunset clause, then no, I do not agree that the sunset clause should be removed. But I do think that staff's alternative suggestion of a smaller minimum lot size is reasonable. Sorry.
You said both. You agreed with both sides.
I like that. Right in the middle. All right.
I'm okay with recommending a new minimum lot size,
And
removing.
so my question would be to staff, this is not going to be just for this one lot. It's going to be every general commercial lot in the city of Sherwood that has the ability to do this.
Through a PUD.
Through a PUD, if council approves it.
If
Right, so
council
it has to come
approves.
back through this process, right?
They have to go back to this process.
So-
Like that's significant for us to be in favor of changing something that drastic at this point. I think is I don't believe enough discussion has happened regarding it. While I do feel that the currently existing housing that falls in lot sizes that are smaller than 5,000 square feet, I believe that those were done well. I do, however, it's very evident that those do have additional impacts, primarily parking. If you do look through either of those existing developments, you will see that street parking is at nearly any time of the day is filled to capacity. And while our code purely only allows for us to define single-family housing to require one off-street parking spot, is that correct, Erica? And so while that might be the code, I feel that the impacts will, even though it meets code, there will be impacts that will be felt that will impact the entire city.
Because it only comes through a PUD, so we get to review it anyway.
But we don't have any other design criteria. There's no other design criteria or parking plan requirements when we remove the sunset.
Oh, I understand that. But it still comes to us because it's a part of a PUD, which is entirely discretionary on our part to do what we want.
But I like having further control of us even deciding whether to allow for a sunset clause, as rather than just a blanket allowance of a reduction.
I think it's very dangerous for a city to do something like that and saying, you get to do it, you don't get to do it. We're going to sunset yours, we're not going to let you do it.
Would it be
that's what we've done.
Would it be appropriate to sunset it based on the fact that we're going through a comprehensive plan update and that all of these Band-Aids should hopefully get removed when the comprehensive plan update is done, and we should not continue.
If you want to sunset this until we get it done for a couple of years, I'm fine with that. How about you guys, the rest of you?
Yeah,
Since we're going through the update anyway.
So you're saying make it 2,000 square feet with a sunset?
2,400 square feet.
2,400 square feet with a sunset.
That's what the applicant.
Reducing 5,000 to 2,400 with the sunset?
Yeah.
Within a PUD.
Within a PUD.
Within a PUD. I mean,
But only
so many layers.
Right, because the reason it was put in there, I believe, was we have such an old comprehensive plan.
Right.
Anyway.
How about sunsetting July 1st, 2020? That should give us plenty of time to figure this out.
Will comprehensive plan?
Will the comprehensive plan be done?
No, it may not, but we can always extend the sunset if we want to.
When is the comprehensive plan projected to be completed? Just
2 years.
Oh, we're 2 years out.
Yeah, about 2 years
All right.
out.
2021.
Or 2020, we can remove this, we're slowly pulling the Band-Aid off and putting it back on, so it doesn't matter, we can revisit this on the next time we get another PUD in here.
So is 2021 fine then? That gives us 2 years. Okay, 2021.
Okay, I lost track of who was.
I'm just in favor of removing it completely at this point. I don't see the need for it anymore if we're going to be doing the comprehensive plan.
I understand Kai's concerns also, and so I don't think it hurts us to sunset July 1st, 2021, and hopefully our comprehensive plan and our zone rewrite will be well underway and we can get this all resolved.
Right, and that was my, and I support Commissioner Kai, and that's where my feeling was, is that to just remove the sunset without having any other documents or safeguards in place other than it's a PUD was of concern. So.
You want a motion on this one?
One that, yes, that incorporates everything.
I moved it. I think this was still part of proposal number 2.
Three.
On proposal number 3, we remove the sunset clause and replace it with July 1st, 2021, and we put the minimum lot size at 2,400 square feet, so it reads as directed on page 47 of our report, and we add the July 1st, 2021, and we change the minimum lot size to 2,400 feet, otherwise it stays the same. Does everybody understand?
Yep, I second.
Thank you.
Regarding this specific PUD and this reduction in lot size, I have a concern. The way the other developments occurred was that they happened comprehensively, in that the smaller density homes were built in conjunction with the larger density homes, or they were built in areas where they were not adjacent to existing homes of a larger lot size. This proposal does not do that. It's intending, or it's proposing to build them adjacent to existing properties that will impact them in certain ways that did not occur with the prior developments.
That's the next vote.
Yeah, so I was going to say.
I understand,
so
but
you can't mix the criteria of this with the PUD, because it mixes up the legislative with land use. So we've got to keep these. We're trying to keep these separate.
So we're trying to think about just the reduction in lot size just for this property without consideration.
So Commissioner Kai, what this will do is allow this PUD and any future PUD to propose a PUD with a lot size of 2,400.
With single-family
Okay.
detached
Right.
instead
Up
of
to-
forcing them to have
So-
Up to
multifamily.
2021.
Right,
Up to
and
the-
so
okay.
basically, any PUD, you'll
Okay.
still get to look at it and see whether or not you think it meets the PUD criteria. It just gives that lot size rather than a 5,000 square foot lot size.
It gives them all the flexibility to do single-family detached up down to 2,400 square feet versus doing high-density residential or multifamily, excuse me. So the trade-off that we've experienced in the past is allowing someone to have single-family detached encouraged home ownership versus an apartment complex that would be allowed in the general commercial PUD.
We're encouraging homeowners.
I just have a point of clarification to Commissioner Cottle's motion. He said remove the sunset clause and put it July 1st, 2021. Revise the
There you go.
existing
That's
sunset clause to the date change of July 1st, 2021.
Do you have a friendly amendment to your motion?
Perfect.
And the second,
Sorry.
accept the friendly amendment?
Accepted.
Okay, so both of those have been accepted. So we have a motion on the floor to recommend for approval the text amendment change to read, located within the high-density residential zone, in that case, a minimum lot size of 2,400 square feet is required, provided the applicant demonstrates that the proposal meets the purpose and intent of the zoning and development code and the Sherwood Comprehensive Plan until July 1st, 2021. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. All right, so now we're to the PUD. Which starts on page 51. Okay. So, I guess starting down at the end, Commissioner Cottle this time,
So this
your
is
crumpled notes.
Yeah, so this is a little bit more for me is I would approve the PUD if the county, if the council interprets commercial buildings to incorporate really just the commercial zoning. So there doesn't have to be neither a proposed or an actual commercial building to exist in order for it to meet the secondary requirement of the commercial purpose. Okay, you understand what I'm trying to say? I would agree with the PUD if that's how the council interprets that code. If the council does not interpret the code that way, then my concerns are moot because they wouldn't meet the criteria of the code. And so I would
want it to pertain to commercial zoning versus commercial building?
I'm saying if that's how the council chooses to interpret, that's how the staff interpret it, as far as I can understand. And if the council interprets it the same as staff, which how I'm suggesting that's not an unreasonable interpretation, I would approve the PUD. I don't know how the rest of you feel.
Okay, and the PUD with all the reductions and
And all
all
the reductions, conditions, and changes that we put into our other approvals.
So I have a question on that, on what Mark's talking, Commissioner Cottle talking about. With the current language that's there, does that basically allow for future development of apartment buildings or other high-density housing complex in that commercial space?
We're conditioning it to be a commercial building.
This PUD has that section of the property designated for commercial development.
Which includes mixed use.
Mixed use. And
By
I guess in my mind, I'm
I think
thinking
that
you're,
you can make it clear in the recommendation
Yeah.
that that's the PUD is for.
so you'd have like bottom shop owners, upper story.
No, what I would probably say is
Strictly commercial.
it's strictly commercial purposes, maybe offices on the second floor, but no residential on the remaining commercial lot 28.
So then that would need to be a condition
Condition.
added to the,
That was my concern. That's why with the buffer zone, with more of what's going on with lot 28, the buffer zone, I thought needs to be there.
So I just want to make sure that, just a point of clarification, I guess. Because your first recommendation was not to approve the zone change, the discussion on the PUD is essentially not, you can't recommend approval of the PUD because of the zone change, but because that's still a question for council, your conversation is, so I guess my point is that your recommendation won't be able to be flat out for approval of the PUD. You'll have to specify approval of the PUD if the zone, help me out.
Sure. So unless the commission, after this discussion, wants to reconsider their recommendation on the zone change component, your recommendation could either be to deny the PUD because it doesn't meet the criteria because this isn't being recommended to be commercially zoned, or it could be something like we recommend approval of the PUD if council decides that the rezone is warranted.
So from my experience, what's happened in the past is that council has free will and they have the ability to change any part of any one of our recommended approvals or denials could become an approval. And if we don't consider the PUD as a whole, then they're not going to get a complete picture from us about our concerns. And so my first statement would be that as the PUD stands with the requirements that are being put on it, would the commission be comfortable with all the other criteria that are being presented on the PUD? That
only if we add that one condition, the lot 28 can have no residential.
and that's you're okay with the rest of the setbacks, the design criteria, and everything else. So let's hear from the rest of the commission with the recommendation for the approval or denial of the PUD.
This is where I go back to the requirement that clearly secondary, you can't have residential in a general commercial zone if there's no commercial already set for it to meet the code language as it stands right now. My interpretation of clearly secondary by definition means secondary to something already existing. So
How can something be secondary to something that doesn't exist?
And so then would I consider if there's a condition that the general commercial had to be developed within a certain period of time? I don't know if we're allowed to do that.
My concern there is just with enforcement. How would you
Right,
possibly
exactly.
enforce that? You develop the residential piece first.
No, exactly. But that's my point, is that we're approving something under the code as it's currently written right now is in violation, in my opinion. And so all things being said, then if that was the case, then I would recommend not approving the PUD as written currently.
And I think if the property owner wishes to bring forth the commercial proposal to us first.
If the phases were flipped, I would have no issue at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's the way the code is written, and I'm reading it, and I'm making my decision based on the code as it stands today, and that's my decision. Yeah.
And I'm
I
seeing
second that.
And
That's what I agree with. It's that lot 28 that needs further
so
understanding
it's
of what's going to be
the
there.
opinion of. So we'll take a vote, but the recommendation from the Planning Commission would be to deny the PUD because the residential is not clearly secondary to the commercial as the code's being interpreted. Is that?
I would agree with that.
I agree with that, but I also feel that there's further concern regarding the reduced setbacks on top of.
Right, so we'll need to take it as two things. We'll need to take a vote to recommend approval or denial, but my concern is that now that we are rushed into 120 days, if we recommend denial without addressing any of the design criteria that if the council interprets the code as Commissioner Cottle, suggested they might do it, or we're asking them to interpret it, and we haven't done the due diligence on the rest of the design criteria, that we haven't done the rest of our work. So we can take a vote on whether or not we would recommend interpretation of the PUD for approval or denial, and then recommend if it is the council's interpretation that it is secondary, then this is the PUD that they're going to approve. So we'll need to still do the due diligence on the interpretation of the council separate. So do we have a motion on the PUD itself?
I'm like, I don't know what to say. I move that we reject the PUD as,
Recommend denial.
sorry,
Yeah, that's
recommend
okay.
denial. It's
That's okay.
really late.
There's a,
You only have 2 more hearings after this.
but I was gonna say,
Yeah, my babysitter is making bank tonight.
I was gonna say there's a sheet of paper someplace that helps us someplace.
Did Commissioner Kai have it?
I think Commissioner Kai has it.
As vice chair?
Oh, there you go.
Very hidden.
Oh, yeah.
We'll let him do it.
I know. Let's see. Deny the application, adopt.
There's no condition, so all you have to do is, I move to recommend denial of the PUD application 1901.
Yep.
Based, okay. That.
Second.
Sounds like a motion.
Well, I'm against it, so I'm just trying to help them out and get this thing moving along.
So who made the motion? Did you?
Well, so,
Kai made
Commissioner
it.
Kai did.
well, okay, I guess
Did
I
you
made
make that motion?
Sure.
Okay.
Commissioner Kai's motion and
Second.
that we recommend denial of the PUD. Any further discussion? Yeah,
PD 1901.
1901. All in favor of the denial?
So I guess are you going to give us reasons
Because,
of why?
because it's not clearly secondary in the interpretation of the planning commission to the general commercial.
But are there, I think there are other reasons that
Well, so I guess that's where I come in to say, recommend denial of the PUD. How about the design criteria part of it, where the minimum setbacks, the height restrictions, all those other things aren't to the benefit of the community? Is that part of the findings that we need to make, or is that part of the design criteria that we need to craft as we try?
Yeah, I would recommend that if you're going to forward a recommendation for denial, you kind of list the concerns that are leading to that recommendation.
All the things.
Right.
Okay. So.
I've already said my thing.
Okay.
I mean, I have, as I stated before, I have concern regarding reduced setbacks, the impacts to existing residents. If it were an issue of just setbacks, then that might be one matter, but considering that these will be higher, than the existing neighborhood, I feel that has to be taken into consideration as well.
I agree with the buffer zone. Still needs to be in place until more definition is done with the lot 28 on the commercial side of what's actually going to be there.
I agree with that. And just everything to make this development work, the setbacks, the 3 stories, the minimum lot sizes, and then just that buffer, because we don't know what's going on with lot 28.
Furthermore, I continue to feel that the proposed development is incompatible with the existing, with the adjacent community for a litany of reasons. So,
which was the zone change.
Stated in yeah.
We provided sufficient. I'm just.
Yes.
Okay. Just we're recommending denial. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor of the denial, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Yeah, I oppose it because I wanted to send it up and let them interpret the statute, but I had the same concern about the secondary use.
Okay, so we.
Send it up as a recommendation for.
Recommendation. Okay, so is staff we're all on board with that. And so if the council then, so last piece to this puzzle is if the, this is killer, that's why it's taking so long. Is it not our job then to say, now the council's going to interpret it however they want to, they still have 4 matters before them, and if they are in agreement with the applicant that it is going to proceed, we have a PUD in front of us. Is it going to come back to us, or will they remand it back to us, or do we need to address the pattern book that
I
has?
don't think we address something in the maybes, because we're recommending denial, so.
I think if anything, they should just remand it.
Yeah,
remand it
I
back to
guess,
planning
and
commission.
I'm really just making stuff up off the top of my head here, but if it gets to the council and the council says, no, we don't agree with the planning commission's recommendation and we are going to approve it, and they want to remand it back to the planning commission for additional work on the pattern book, I would imagine that the applicant would probably be willing to waive the 120 days, but I don't know. So we'll, I think, cross that bridge.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in doing a bunch of work on a maybe,
Yeah.
because we recommend against it.
Yeah, because we're recommending denial, but if the council doesn't take our recommendation and they vote to approve all 4 pieces to this puzzle, they're going to take the pattern book and all the other setbacks, building heights, lot sizes, and some of those things I have concern with because they have not, the design criteria that's in the PUD has not addressed blank walls to the side of the houses, so they, there are things within the setbacks and all the other things that are part of the PUD application that I think would warrant a second look if all the other pieces come into play.
So perhaps the recommendation can say, Planning Commission is recommending denial for these reasons. If City Council wants to approve, we recommend that you take a close look at the pattern book and related issues.
Or that it be remanded to the
consider
planning commission.
remanding if
I don't, do they
120
have,
days would allow, if it's extended, right?
because at that point, where the council's having to craft approval of the PUD.
I think it's fair, I mean, Counselor Scott is going to be able to note that you guys did not delve into the pattern book at all. And so hopefully, if it gets to that point and the council is, yes, we want to approve it, there will be some acknowledgement and understanding that they do need to look at the pattern book and that you did not provide a recommendation on that.
Right, they'll know that. They'll know what we didn't do, because we didn't do it.
Right. And what are the chances that they'll, well, we don't know the chances, but my concern being buildings with frontages on 2 or more streets should be set back at least, it's like, we only have one-sided commercial development, which, I
We know you're worried about it with them because of their capabilities, but we've got to have some trust in the council.
all right. Okay.
So I
joke.
think with that you have made your recommendation on this particular matter, I believe.
Right, you could move
Moving
on to
2
new
more
business.
hearings.
Yeah, 2 more hearings. Okay.
Do you want to take a little break or anything?
We have to do these hearings tonight. Is there 120
Yes.
days of clicking?
There are 120 days on both, and both, I believe, are very eager for
Okay.
a decision.
A
They can
decision
speak for
tonight.
themselves.
5-minute break.
Oh, we're gonna take 5 minute break.
And so we are not addressing.
Just for the record, I don't know if it's, have you taken a break or,
We,
so you're plowing through, you're not taking a break?
we're taking a 5-minute break.
I don't think you've gavelled it, so I don't know if
Okay.
it's clear.
exceeded.
I didn't hear that gavel.
I know.
Do it again.
I can. I'm looking for my consent agenda just to know where I'm at. Public hearing, land use SP 1901. And because my previous script was a combination of two, I believe that I need to read the quasi-land. And everybody's nodding their heads, so. Oh, good, it's right in front of me. Sweet. All right. Public hearing on SP 1901 is called to order. The public hearing this evening will be conducted as follows. Staff will present the staff report. Questions, if any, by the hearing body for staff. We will then open the public hearing for testimony, and time will be limited as follows. Applicant 30 minutes, split between presentation and rebuttal. Persons in favor of the application 4 minutes each. Persons opposed to the application 4 minutes each. And rebuttal from the applicant using the remainder of their 30 minutes. We will then close the public hearing. No other comments will be heard from the public or the applicants. Final comments by staff. Questions of staff, if any, by the commission, and discussion by the commission. A decision may be made by the planning commission at the close of the hearing, or the matter may be continued to a time and date certain. If the matter is continued to a date certain, this will be the only notice of that date you receive. You wish to speak, please fill out one of the blue testimony forms and submit it to the planning commission secretary. The chair will recognize people who wish to speak, and any questions should be addressed through the chair. When you come forward, please state your name and address for the record. In reaching a decision on the application, the commission must consider whether the application meets the relevant approval criteria in the city's land use regulations. Those criteria are identified in the staff report. There are 2 copies of the staff report available in the room this evening. The testimony and evidence must address these criteria or other criteria you believe to apply to the decision. Please note, failure to raise an issue with enough detail to enable the commission, the applicant, and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issues precludes an appeal to the city council or land use board of appeals on that issue. Also, failure by the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues regarding proposed conditions of approval, again with enough detail to allow the commission to respond to the issue, precludes an action for damages in circuit court. And as the Planning Commission, we will be making a decision on this, and any appeal would be to City Council. At this time, I would like to ask members of the Commission to disclose any ex parte contacts, bias, or conflicts of interest. Indicate the nature and extent of the ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest, and indicate whether you intend to participate in or abstain from the hearing. Got nothing. All right. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge any Planning Commission member's ability to participate this evening? All right. I just don't have any blue cards, so staff will now present the staff report.
If it pleases the chair, I can offer a truncated version of the presentation this evening if you like.
I don't know about the chair.
It pleases the chair greatly.
Okay, well, the project is located along Tualatin-Sherwood Road at the corner of Saippole Road and Tualatin-Sherwood Road. The zoning is general industrial. The project, as was written in the staff report, includes 3 warehouse structures on 3 existing lots. They are proposing shared parking. The lots total about 12 acres. There's one existing single-family home on one of the lots that is proposed to be removed, and the access comes from Wild Rose Place and Saippole Road. Now, there are a number of criteria. We felt that the application met all of the criteria with the conditions of approval that we added. At this point, I will just highlight some changes that happened after the staff report was published. Specifically, there was a request by the applicant in the application to reduce the 10-foot landscape buffer setback that you see on the screen in front of you right now. Staff recommended that that not be supported because staff misunderstood the request. I thought it was along the street frontage. The applicants subsequently informed me that it was actually just this area here where the existing lumber yard is. They were proposing that the 10-foot landscaping requirement be reduced to 5 there, anticipating some future redevelopment of that property, and at which point they could share that 5-foot requirement on their side, which our code does allow. So with that correction, staff is fully in support of what the applicant is proposing. I'm sorry? It wasn't actually written into a condition, so yeah, we didn't need to worry about that.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing that changed after the application was published, or sorry, after the staff report was published, was we had a set of conditions of approval that were recommended from the county, because Cypole is the county's road, Tualatin Sherwood is the county's road, and we entered those into the staff report in the conditions of approval. They subsequently wanted to revise those, and they sent us a memo, or sorry, they sent us a letter requesting to swap those out. So what we have in front of you is a memo dated today, where we're recommending that we remove the previous county's conditions, which were actually all encapsulated just in condition number 19, so it's a pretty easy swap. So we're recommending delete condition number 19 completely and add a new set of conditions of approval from the county. This packet looks daunting. It's not quite that daunting. It's the conditions that the county are proposing are largely similar, with one exception. And you can look at the screen in front of you, and it will highlight this. Previously, the county was recommending that we require the applicant to install a right-hand turn lane on Tualatin Sherwood Road going into Wild Rose Place. The county looked into this more and came to the conclusion that that right-hand turn lane was not needed because they did not meet the criteria for that, and that's in their letter, which is in your memo. And so they've requested that that requirement be removed. And Bob had that condition in there as well, and so Bob acknowledged that it's up to the county, it's their road, and so we struck Bob's condition too. And so as it sits in here, basically just waives that right-hand turn lane. If the county doesn't want to ask for it, that's correct. So with that, staff feels with the conditions of approval, it meets all of the criteria requirements, and we recommend approval with the changes shown in the memo. That concludes staff's presentation. The applicant didn't have a presentation, but they're happy to answer any questions you might have.
So I just want clarification. So the number 19,
gone.
So the right-of-way dedication on Cypole is also gone too?
Correct.
Wait,
is that correct?
Because your conversation was on 12th and
No,
Sherwood
there's
Road.
still a right-of-way dedication required on Cypole if you read their letter. That didn't change.
But you took.
They're asking for an additional 6 feet, is that correct, Bob?
But you removed number 19 completely, which is where the right-of-way dedication
Sure, but
for
then-
Cypole Road.
But then it's added 44, number 44.
Correct. I've added number 44, which kind of replaced that. See, number 44 on page 2 of the memo
Okay.
says dedication of additional 6 feet of right-of-way from the center line on Cypole. And they also want a trail along Cypole as well. They're okay with that being in an easement. It doesn't have to fit in the right-of-way. The way we wrote these conditions, we say we can go either way. The way the county wrote the conditions, they say they can go either way. We've since talked to Bob. Bob's comfortable having that in a easement as well. We didn't clarify that in the conditions because we didn't think it needed to be clarified, but we're comfortable with that either way.
So that was because I have circled 12-foot multi-path with
Sure.
5-foot planters. So that's going to be, it's in the conditions, but however it is accommodated either in the easement or in the right-of-way or
correct
on their property. It's all taken care of. Okay. And I had a typo or two.
So, back on the map, I'm sorry, I have a quick question. So general access into the two buildings is off Cypole Road, not off Tualatin Sherwood?
There's 2 points, correct. There is zero access on Tualatin Sherwood Road. There's 2 access points. One is on Cypole, and the other one is on Wild Rose. And you see there is going to be a connection between the two. That's going to be a private road. Bob really wanted a full-blown road there. The county didn't want a road there because they felt that the connection point on Cypole was too close to the intersection of Tualatin Sherwood. So by making that a private road with an easement across it, open to the public, so anybody can use that road, but it will function as a private road, satisfied both parties. And so that will help connect the back half of Wild Rose's cul-de-sac with Cypole.
Which makes left turn out of Wild Rose Place not required because they'll use the private road, get on the Cypole, and then turn at a control intersection, which is what's been woefully needed
Correct.
there for a long time.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the lumber company's staying there for the time.
This application's got nothing to do with the lumber project, correct? Nothing at all.
On page 165, an O&M plan should be submitted. I just think that spelling out what O&M is, I'm assuming operations and maintenance. Okay. So,
Runoff and drainage goes to city sewer off-site pole?
There's a storm drainage system that runs down the east side of the existing lumber company site. And so they will be treating on site and discharging into that pipe that runs down and into conveyance off-site into a public system.
So all hardscape runoff will be diverted that way?
okay. And then on D31, it says will need to be, prior to acceptance of the public the proposed property line adjustment must be recorded. I would just modify the language. And then I guess usually we have the applicant come up so that I can officially ask if you're in agreement with all the conditions of approval.
So, and just technically though, so I don't believe you've actually opened the public hearing, so
Okay,
I
so-
recommend that you open the public hearing, get this.
So we will officially open for applicant, which I don't have anybody to come up. I don't have, they're all pointing at each other, so I would have an applicant for the record come up with your name and address.
Did you guys draw straws?
I lost. Hi, my name's Mike DeArmy. I'm with Phelan Development Company. I don't live in the area, but I'm happy to give you my address anyway, so if you need it.
You're representing the applicant.
I represent the applicant, yes.
Wonderful. So the staff has given a staff report, and there's a set of conditions of approval as revised this evening. Are you in acceptance of the conditions as presented by staff?
We are.
Excellent. And I want to thank you. The buildings have architectural feature and design that are, I think, will fit well with what's going on at 12th and Sherwood
I think it'll
Road.
look good. It's kind of the entry to the city, so we want to make sure it looks professional.
So I appreciate the
Oh,
design
yeah.
time that you took to be able to make it appealing from the side that everybody's going to see it as they enter our community. So thank you. Any questions of the applicant before we let him use the other? That's it then.
Okay.
All right. They're in
Thank you.
acceptance of our conditions as amended this evening. So thank you. I have no other people, no blue cards. Does anybody else wish to testify this evening? Seeing no one come up, we will close the public hearing officially. And I would entertain a motion.
I move we approve SP 1901 as amended.
I second, yeah.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we approve SP01 Cyple Industrial Center with the revised conditions presented by staff this evening. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. 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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
That was a long wait.
You were ready.
Thanks for waiting.
Yes, and
I'm ready to approve the next one. I wanted to find asking comments.
Where's your respect for due process?
I actually had a city councilman's like 6 minutes
Go ahead.
long.
Really?
Boom, boom, boom. We had a consent agenda in one item. Everybody's in agreement already.
What's that?
Yeah, if you turn it into staff, in case there's an appeal, it would go to,
Yeah.
you turn in all the big thick binders to staff so they can have it on appeal. All right, so we have one more, and based on previous experience, I need to read this again for this hearing.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
Yes, you do. It's a quasi-judicial case, so we have to read the disclaimer.
So, and just for the future, one thing that the city recorder has started doing is when there's a public hearing, she kind of reads it for all of the applicable hearings. So if that's just something we can remind you of.
Unless you like reading it over and over and over.
I know, it is not as much fun as you think it is. The public hearing on VAR 1902 Sherwood School District High School sign variance is called to order. The public hearing this evening will be conducted as follows. Staff will present the staff report, questions by the hearing body for staff. We will then open the public hearing for testimony, and time will be limited as follows. Applicant 30 minutes, persons in favor of the application 4 minutes, persons opposed to the application 4 minutes, rebuttal from the applicant, which is the remainder of the 30 minutes. We will then close the public hearing. Final comments by staff, questions of staff, if any, by the commission, and discussion by the commission. A decision may be made by the planning commission at the close of the hearing, or the matter may be continued to a time and date certain. If the matter is continued to a date certain, this will be the only notice of that date you receive. If you wish to speak, please fill out one of the blue testimony forms and submit it to the planning commission secretary. The chair will recognize people who wish to speak, and any questions should be addressed through the chair. When you come forward, please state your name and address for the record. In reaching a decision on the application, the commission must consider whether the application meets the relevant approval criteria in the city's land use regulations. Those criteria are identified in the staff report. There are 2 copies of the staff report available in the room this evening. The testimony and evidence must address these criteria or other criteria you believe to apply to the decision. Please note, failure to raise an issue with enough detail to enable the commission, the applicant, and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes an appeal to the City Council or Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. Also, failure by the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues regarding proposed conditions of approval, again with enough detail to allow the commission to respond, precludes an action for damages in circuit courts. This hearing is going to be recommending we're making the final decision tonight. Any appeal would be to the City Council. At this time, I would like to ask members of the commission to disclose any ex parte contact, bias, or conflicts of interest. Please indicate the nature and extent of the ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest, and indicate whether you intend to participate in or abstain from the hearing. Hearing none, we'll have the staff report.
Okay, I'm assuming we want another truncated staff report, so I'll try to make this smaller. This is for a monument sign at the high school, and they can't quite meet the setback requirement that is listed in our sign section. And to try and encapsulate all of the criteria into really one nutshell, it has to be beyond their control. And in this project site, we have, let me flip to that slide. This site features a lot of topography. And the topography on the site is such that they have a basin right next to where the main entrance corner of the high school is. And that basin kind of has to be there because it's a low point of the site. So all the drainage drains to that location. There wasn't a lot of other locations they could put that. There's also a lot of other constraints and requirements on the sign area that really limits where they can put it. They have a public utility easement behind them. They have a trail that's gone behind them. And yes, to an extent, these are of their design, but the topography is driving the entire site's design. And so they didn't really have much of a choice. The property line here is located quite a bit back from the road already. And so there's a 15-foot setback requirement. And technically they're only 3 feet from their property line, but there's 17 feet between the edge of the pavement and the beginning of their property line. And so they really do meet the intent of the code because they're 20 feet away from the edge of the pavement, well beyond the 15-foot requirement. But because of where their property line is, they need this variance. So with that, staff feels they meet the criteria and is recommending approval tonight. That's all I have. The applicant is here. If you have any questions, well, not the applicant, but the representative of the applicant.
All right, we will now open the hearing for the applicant to come forward. Mr. Brad Kilby, which I don't...
34-minute presentation. Could you play that? Just for questions, we're working.
If you got a 34-minute, I'm biased.
We worked with staff. There were some the county and the county and our KPFF consulting engineers were not coordinating. It was coordinated now, and so this sign in this location is where we would propose it, and that's where that was the need for the variance. And so if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Are you in agreement to all the conditions approval as presented in the report?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Any questions of the...
Motion to pass.
Are you happy? We have to close the public hearing first.
Are you happy you got to sit through our entire meeting?
I'm sorry?
Are you happy you got to sit through our entire meeting?
He's overjoyed.
Bittersweet.
Oh, the memories. of the guy that used to be the guy I looked at and said, "Help me," a lot. Okay, all right. So, no further testimony from the applicant. All right. Seeing no one else in the audience here, I'm going to presume there's no proponents or opponents to the application, so we will close the public hearing. And Commission Vice Chair Kai.
I move that we approve the application for VAR 1902 based on the applicant testimony, public testimony received, and the analysis findings and conditions in the staff report.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we approve VAR 1902 Sherwood School District High School sign variance. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Is it after they get moved in a year and a half?
When they widen the road, I don't even know if there's anything. There can't be anything else.
Or when they move to high school?
Planning Commissioner announcements?
None.
None. All right. All adjourned?